Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto had the power of REPO the ninja opera. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. REPO, the ninja opera. It started not long after the Kyuubi incident. The mass exposure of demonic energy released at that time had an unforeseen side effect. It started first in the shinobi that had survived the battle, but not long after it developed in the civilian population as well. An epidemic of organ failures. Because the cause was demonic in origin, all conventional treatment only met with failure. Not even the legendary medic Tsunade was able to find a cure. Tens of thousands died, and that number was rising steadily. But, as with all great tragedies, there was hope. The missing nin Orochimaru had found a way to artificially grow new organs. And so it was that the Sannin was granted amnesty for his past crimes and welcomed back to the village as a hero. And so was formed Gene Colorado. And so the village was saved. However, the process of making new organs was time-consuming and expensive. No one could afford to pay the man up front. However, this was not a problem. Gene Company offered an easy financing system. However, hidden in the small print W, as a clause that now haunts the world to this day. For if you missed even a single payment, the organ would revert back to Gene Company property and would be repossessed. In the beginning, the third Hokage, who had taken the mantle of office after his successor's death, was lived and made repossessions illegal. In response, Orochimaru closed the doors of Gene Company, and when the death toll started to climb, once again the Hokage was forced to legalize repossessions. And soon Gene Company was once again the open for business, and the Snake Sannin was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the village. However, that was 12 years ago, and now it's become a fashion statement to buy new organs, and as such there is always someone defaulting on their payments, and so always work for the repo man. It was a particularly bright day in the village, hidden in the leaves. And so it should be, because today was the day that the next generation of ninja were slated to graduate from the Shinobi Academy. And this year's graduating class had a few notable faces. First was Sakura Haruno, although her fame did not come from her ninja status. No, although her career was just starting, she had quickly become the voice of Gene Co. and often could be found at most of the corporation's public functions. Next, and certainly not least, was Kiba Inzuaka, adopted son of Orochimaru. After most of the Inzuaka clan died off, in an act of charity, Orochimaru adopted the heir of the clan as his own. Most agree that this was just a PR move on his part. However, the case remains that as his son, Kiba had grown up believing, and not necessarily wrongly so, that he was above the law and had developed a slight problem with violent outbursts. Case in point, just last week he gutted the assistant teacher Mizuki because he looked at him funny. And last but not least was the morose-looking blonde sitting at the back of the class. Naruto Uzumaki Senju, adopted son of the late Tsunade and likely to become one of the greatest medics the academy had produced since his late mother. Although not as well versed in his chakra control due to particular fuzzball locked away in his gut, he had instead focused on doing things the good old-fashioned way, and as such had become very adept at using scalpels and other surgical equipment as both tools of healing and in the area of combat. However, at the moment his Uts were focused solely on the thought of her and on how much his failure had cost him. However, before he could completely lose himself in his grief, the door to their room opened and in walked their teacher. Shaking his head and focusing on the man at the front of the room, Naruto mentally prepared himself. After all, he knew that if she was still around, she would be disappointed if he failed something as simple as the graduation test. The test had been painfully easy, Naruto had thought to himself. Honestly, make some bushin and you're a genin. Though Naruto thought that maybe he shouldn't badmouth the test. After all, he still couldn't make the damn things and only passed because his mother had taught him the Kujibushin. Still, they could have at least made it a little more challenging. And now here he was sitting with his two new teammates waiting for his tardy sensei to show up. On his left was none other than the burgeoning singer and voice of Gene Co. Sakura Haruno. He was honest enough with himself to admit that for a time he had thought that he was in love with the pink-haired singer, and that if his situation wasn't what it was he might still be, but as it is he was no longer looking for love. He wasn't foolish enough to think that there was a loving type of relationship in his future. On his right sat the one and only Sasuke Uchiha, last of his clan, and all-around moody bastard. Though if Naruto thought about it, he himself had been acting that way himself for the good part of a year and therefore in no place to start complaining about others acting the same way. Ending the clock on the wall, another bored look, he noticed that their sensei was now 2.5 hours late. Placing his head back down on the desk, Naruto once again retreated into his mind, contemplating once again why he has on this particular team again. Oh right, I'm here to keep the All Might Uchiha alive long enough to start rebuilding his clan, and the Snake Man probably pulled some ings to have his star singer assigned for the same reasons, lucky me. Just then the door opened and a man with a covered face and some of the oddest hair Naruto had seen to date poked his head in. My first impression of you guys is, you're rather dull. Meet me up on the roof in 5. And with that he disappeared in a puff of smoke. I take it that was our new sensei? Asked Naruto to the others. The only response he got was a shoulder shrug from Sakura and an "HN" from Sasuke before they both got up and walked out the door, quickly followed by Naruto. A few flights of stairs later and all were now sitting in front of their sensei. Let's get introductions out of the way first. The tall lanky man asked with an odd, what Naruto could only describe as an eye smile, on the only visible part of his face. Sensei, why don't you go first? So we know what to do. The slender pink-haired girl asked. Oh, well, my name's Haku SP. Kakashi. My likes are none of your business, same go for dislikes. I have a few hobbies and dreams for the future. Well, he just kind of trailed off at the end, but Naruto swore he heard some kind of giggle come from the man. Well, now how about you, Pinky? He asked, pointing at her. Ah well, my name's Sakura Haruno. I like my eyes. This was actually the first time he had noticed, but now that he was looking he could tell they were Gene Company products. Not many people would be able to tell the difference, but in his line of work it was somewhat necessary. And, here she looked over at the brooding Uchiha. I dislike Ino, pig, and as for Dr. EAMS for the future. Again she looked over at the Uchiha and let out a small sigh. Okay then, how about you, duck butt? Asked Kakashi with an amused look on his I. Deciding that rising to UCH obvious bait was too far beneath him, he simply ignored the comment and soldiered on. My name's Sasuke Uchiha. I don't really like or dislike anything. I don't really have a dream, it's more of an ambition. To kill a certain man and resurrect my clan. Again Sakura swooned at how dark and broody her Sasuke was. Well then you're up, Blondie. Kakashi said while pointing at him. My name's Naruto Uzumaki Senju. I like. And here was Naruto's problem, he didn't really have time to get to like much of anything. I like my scalpels, not necessarily a lie, he really did like them, but it sounded a bit shallow even as he was saying it. I'd rather not comment on the stuff I dislike. As for dream for the future, well, I guess to follow in my mother's footstep and become a legendary medic. What a laugh. He had no right to call himself a medic. Well then, now that that's out of the way, we can get down to business. You're to report to Training Area 7 at 6:30 tomorrow for survival training. He finished what Naruto had quickly come to realize was an amused expression. Have to give him credit, he can be pretty expressive with just one eye, Naruto thought to himself. But sensei, we've already done survival training in the academy. Piped up Sakura, who up until this point had been stealing glances at Sasuke. Well, it's more of a test to see if you really have what it takes to be a genin than training. Answered Kakashi. What? But we already passed the genin test, why do we have to take another? She all but screamed. Oh, that was just to weed out the hopeless cases. This TASE is your real genin test, and I'll warn you now, it has a 66.6% failure rate. Even Sasuke dropped his boarded look at that. Anyway, remember training filed 7 at 6:30. Oh, I wouldn't recommend eating breakfast or you're just going to puke anyways. With that ominous warning, he suddenly threw on one of his amused little eye smiles. See ya. And with that disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving 3 speechless genin hopefuls on the roof. Well, seems like we've got a full day ahead of us tomorrow, so I think I'm going to head home now. See you guys later. And with that started to walk down the stairs back into the academy. It was late, probably nearing 3 in the morning, but still the sound of running feet could be heard thundering down one of the village's side streets. These feet belonged to one Futoshi Asenko, one of the thousands of merchants that called Konoha home. He owned a small house where he, his wife and 2 children lived in relative comfort, a bit cramped perhaps, but what can you do? He owned and operated a small connivance store not too far from his house. However, business had dried up recently and it had been getting harder and harder to make ends meet. Which actually leads as to why he was running like his life depended on it, which it does, by the way. His financial problems had gotten to the point where he was no longer able to pay for the heart he had bought last year. Unfortunately, Jinko had a very strict payment plan and he knew that begging for an extension was useless. Suddenly a noise from behind him made him jump, and instead of wasting time looking behind him, he simply ran. He ran as hard as he could. He didn't want to die. He had a wife and kids to live for. With his attention firmly focused on the sound of feet behind him, he didn't notice he ninja wire strung across the road until he had already tripped over it. Before he even had a chance to right himself, he received a rather quick kick to the side of the head that left him lying flat on his back. Suddenly there was a heavy pressure on his chest, and when he looked up, all he could see was his own death staring back at him. Despite him standing at only 5 foot, if that, the visage in front was one that terrorized the dreams of anyone who missed a payment for the new organs. The repo man, decked out in large black rubber gloves and boots, black leather pants and oversized apron, there was no mistaking the person in front of him. But it wasn't the clothes, it was the mask that haunted people's dreams, that mockery of a surgeon's headgear and that light that illuminated his eyes. Pick in profile, or just Google it. This was where all conscious thought left him as the sharp blade of his scalpel sliced through his neck, cutting his jugular artery as well as his windpipe. Laying on the ground trying to stop the bleeding with his hands while also desperately trying gasp in what air he could, he didn't even notice when the black-clad figure started to slice away at his chest, peeling the skin back, taking hold of his still beating heart and pulling it out of his chest. And with that last act of brutality, the life of Futoshi Asenko ended and his corpse was left out in the middle of the street. Securing the organ in a plastic bag and storing that in his specially made medical bag, he stood up and surveyed the world around him. That's when he noticed the squad of ANBU that were currently watching him from the roof of one of the buildings on the other side of the street. Giving them a simple note, he turned his back and started to walk down the street, not even giving the men behind him another look. It had become an unwritten rule that repo business was just that. He stayed out of the ANBU's way, they did the same. Everyone walked away happy, well in one piece at any rate. The wall opened up in the usual way and he quickly walked through, not wanting to be seen in this part of town. Now all that stood before him was the blackness of the tunnel to his home. Slowly making his way down the tunnel, his thought wandered, as they so often did now, to how he had gotten himself in this situation. It had been almost a year now. A year of hunting down people, cutting them open and gutting them like wild animals, and for what? Because he made a mistake, because he wasn't good enough when it counted. No, he knew he had no one to blame for his current situation than himself, and perhaps it was fitting. Perhaps this was his punishment for his failures, and if so, he would simply have to live with it. With that final thought, he entered the basement of his home, the same one he had shared with his mother. The same one he had killed her in. However, it wasn't the same. What was once nothing but unused storage had become his little slice of hell. Knives and other medical equipment hung from hooks all over the place. There were a number of operating tables, all of which had seen the last few moments of someone's life. Slowly stripping off his coat and hanging it on a hook in one of the side rooms, he did the same for the rest of his outfit, finally removing his mask and placing it on a dummy head he had placed on one of the work tables, revealing a boy with bright blonde hair and deep blue eyes. "I hate my job," Naruto grumbles to himself before slowly walking up the stairs to the main part of the house for what little sleep he could get before Kakashi's test. Well, there you have it, the first Naruto Repo X over. So what do you guys think? Good, bad, mad at me for not updating one of my other stories? Also figured I'd try and answer some of the questions that are floating around in those mushy things in between your ears. First off, I'll give you more of Naruto's backstory later, maybe next chapter, maybe not, who knows. Second, if anyone's acting a little Strange, like the third letting repo men go around gutting his villagers for example. The simple answer is it's needed for the story. Other than that I think I'm done here, so anyways, any more questy? Ons just ask, and as always the more reviews you leave the sooner I might update. Seriously, they're like some king of writing drug, just can't get enough of them. Till next time, bye. Legal Assassin. Repo. The Ninja Opera. It was late, well past midnight. The clouds had covered the moon and the stars, and the only source of light to be found was that inside of his mask. He had been waiting for nearly an hour for his target to return home for the night. Hitome something or other. He never really bothered remembering their names. A face was all he needed. Now that he thought about it, was actually kind of ironic. Here he was waiting so he could take those beautiful eyes. He actually felt a small smile slip onto his face at the irony. Not for the first time he wondered if the job was finally taking its toll on his mind. Though he quickly pushed those thoughts aside when he saw someone cross the street towards the building. He figured that at this time of night chances were pretty good this was his girl. God, I hope she's not a screamer. He thought to himself as he remembered the last one brought almost 3 squad of Anbu down on him. Not that it mattered once they saw who he was, they backed off fast enough. Though he could tell some of them decided to stay and watch. Fucking bastards, not like he's not under enough stress. The last thing he needed was an audience. Landing quietly behind the girl was easy enough, she was just a civilian after all. Grabbing her shoulder and spinning her around, he immediately knew he had the right girl. Before he could even bring his KNI Faye up to cut her thought, she let off one of loudest screams he had ever heard. Of course she's a screamer, he thought to himself before quickly slashing her thought and laying her body down on the ground. He hated repos. They were a real pain to get out intact. Though he had to admit it beat the hell out of finding that damn cat every other day. God, he hated that cat, and when he suggests amputating a leg or two everybody freaks out. It's not like it would have been that hard. Hell, he could have done it with what he had on him at the time. Still, he shouldn't be complaining. D-rank missions might be boring, but he got enough excitement at night. Besides, they were normal and he needed as much normal in his life as he could get. They're finished a personal best if I do say so myself, 2.5 minuet total. As he stood up he couldn't help feel the eyes on his back, and lo and behold a squad of Anbu, new guys too I could tell. None of the veterans even stopped to look anymore. He did, and he even give them a second look as he grabbed his bag and started to walk away, longing for the very comfortable bed waiting for him back home. Now that his job was done, does he allow his mind to wonder? I'm still not entirely sure just how we passed our genin exam. Hell, the only reason I offered Sakura some food was because her stomach growling would have given us away in no time, and I really didn't want to have to go back to the academy. Oh well, we passed, so it doesn't really matter anymore. Though I'll admit this whole team thing really isn't me. Maybe I've been doing repos too long, or maybe I've always been the lone wolf type, but whatever, genin work in teams, so that's what I'll do. Besides, it's better than my night job. Naruto well and truly hated this place. Nothing good had ever happened here. He sold his soul here. He had killed his first man here. He had first meet old Snake Face here. Now there was a memory he wished he could forget. It also didn't help that a good number of Opal here knew exactly what he was, and that had always left a bad taste in his mouth. However, it seemed like a good idea to tell his employer that he wouldn't be in the village for a while. Didn't need him thinking, he had up and ran. He stopped at the receptionist's desk in front of the large double door that would lead to Orochimaru's office. Excuse me, I don't suppose His Holiness is free at the moment. This had been a long-standing game, he supposed, between the two. Naruto never called him by his real name, and Orochimaru always to whatever he said as the highest compliment possible. It was both annoying and amusing at the same time. But he refused to be the first one to crack, and well, Orochimaru didn't seem like he was cracking anytime soon either. Why, of course, Mr. Senju. You know His Holiness. She sniggered a little at the nickname. Always has time to talk to one of his employees. She raised a slight eyebrow at the end and pushed a concealed button that opened the double doors in front of him. He simply rolled an eye at her thinly veiled reference to his night job and walked into the surprisingly humble office, well, as humble as the snake could get. Thankfully none of his kids were there at the moment. The three were almost as fucked up as their father, and personally he preferred dealing with the snake more. He at least knew what to expect from the man. "Ah, Naruto my boy. It's such a pleasure to see you again. It really has been too long since we've been able to talk face to face like this." The snake Sannin greeted with a large grin on his face. "But I'm sure this isn't a social call now, is it? You know me too well. Actually, I just came to inform you that my squad has been given a mission outside of Konoha and so won't be able to collect any outstanding debts in the meantime," Naruto said, taking a seat on the couch in front of the snake Sannin's desk. "Oh, is it that time already? Off saving damsels in distress and fighting evil missing nin?" He let out a little chortle at his own joke. Naruto just rolled his eyes. "Well, I'm sure we'll be able to hold down the fort while you're off saving the world and whatnot, but if you don't mind my asking, just where is it you'll be heading? After all, we have people from all over coming to us and there's always someone missing a payment now, isn't there?" he questioned with a knowing grin. Naruto just groaned. Here he was hoping that he might get a small vacation, and now along with guarding the old man he had to play REPO as well. "We'll be heading to the land of waves, though I wouldn't think that there would be many repossessions needed out that far. It is a rather poor country, not exactly the type of people who opt for elective surgery, if you know what I mean." "Now Naruto, let's not be so hasty. There's no way to know for sure unless we look now, is there?" he questioned. "Well, damn, so much for a nice simple mission." "No, I guess there's not," he answered, knowing there'd be at least a few. There always were. "Well then, let me just check the file," he said as he turned and walked over to a filing cabinet, flipped through a few folders before coming to a stop. "Well, what do you know? There are a few outstanding claims in Wave. Not too many of course, but enough to keep you occupied, I'm sure," he said with that evil fucking smile of his. "And here I was hoping to actually get a few nights of decent sleep," Naruto said, mostly to himself. "Sleep is highly overrated, my dear doctor. Besides, you've been doing fine so far. I'm sure a few more nights won't hurt that much," he said with a snide little laugh. "And how, pray tell, am I supposed to keep my little nighttime excursions from the rest of my team? I'm sure Kakashi is already suspicious, and I doubt he would miss bunch of bodies missing organs. He'll find me out for sure." He was getting desperate now, and he knew it, but he really didn't want to deal with this crap on his first mission. "Now you're just whining. Besides, I'm sure you'll think of something out, and if not, well, how long did you really think you could hide this little secret of yours?" he asked. Fuck it, there was no way he was getting out of this. He might as well just cut his losses and go. "Fine, but really, is one little vacation too much to ask for?" And with that he grabbed the folder and headed out. He still needed to pack, and now he had to pack twice as much. God, he hated his luck. His first C-rank mission, and what happens there? Attracted by a bloody A-rank missing nin with a sword taller than him. And on top of that he had something like 20 repositions to do while he was here. Sometimes he just wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. What god had he pissed off to end up where he was? All he had ever wanted was to follow in his mother's footsteps, to be a good doctor, to help people. What the hell was wrong with that? But fate or chance, or maybe his own incompetence, had denied him his dream and had cast him from the light to where he now stood, standing alone outside the home of his first target. Just some local fisherman who had needed a new heart, who was now going to lose that heart. Deciding that if he hurried he might be able knock off another target, he quickly approached the house and decided that the direct approach might be the easiest. After all, who expects a repo man to knock on the front door? It was actually kind of funny how many times this worked. Giving his head a good shake to clear it, he raised his hand and knocked on the door and waited for the old man to answer. He did not have to wait long. As soon as the door opened, he slashed the man across the throat before quickly pushing him back inside the house, ripping his old gray shirt off, and quickly cutting away at the surrounding flesh and muscle until he was able to simply reach in under the rib cage and pluck out the proper organ. His job done, he then decided that he didn't have time go out and try and find any of the other targets tonight. Once aim cursing that snake bastard for giving him so many damn targets and such a small window to complete it in. Well, he would just have to show him. He may not have been terribly fond of the job, but he was good at it, and he'd be damned if he let that snake bastard prove him otherwise. So quickly gathering his things and left the body to be discovered by the man's relatives or wild animals, either one was fine. As dawn broke, Naruto found his conscious mind slowly return to him. He had decided to sleep outside last night. He really didn't want to deal with any annoying questions first thing in the morning. Suddenly he noticed the presence of someone else in the clearing. Crap, I'm still wearing my business suit. Thankfully he still had his mask, and that was the only thing keeping this person alive at the moment. Deciding that playing possum anymore was just plain stupid, he sat up and turned his head to look at the person that had stumbled upon his sleeping form. Haku had been out early, trying to find the right herbs to help speed up his master's healing. He had only been in bed 2 days, but he acted like it had been 2 weeks. How he could be a demon in a fight and petulant child in his sick bed still astounded him. However, he was not out here to contemplate his master's mental quirks. Continuing his search, however, uncovered something he had honestly thought he would never see. A repo man, and not just anyone but one that had apparently fallen asleep in the clearing. He instantly remembered everything that he and Zabuza had heard about this particular group of people, which was admittedly not much. There wasn't a large demand outside of Konoha for organs, though from what he had heard Gene Company was starting to make headway in the other major shinobi villages. But still, a repo man outside of Konoha was almost unheard of, and here one was seemingly taking a nap. Probably had a long night. That thought had brought the fact that a long night for him probably involved the repossession of a number of organs. That was their job after all. However, in all of his internal dialogue he had completely lost track of the person he was studying, and when he looked back he saw the person sitting upright looking right at him. There was a long awkward pause. Hi. Perhaps not the most elegant thing to say, but he was never the elegant type anyway. Haku wasn't quite sure how to respond to that. It wasn't every day you talked to someone who harvested body parts for a living, even for a missing nin that was right up there on the wired-o-meter. However, deciding that offending him might not be the best idea. Besides, all his body parts were part of the original set as it were, so no worries about being on his repo list. Hi. He really didn't want it to sound as awkward as it did. This was just plain stupid, Naruto thought to himself as he finally got to his feet and looked around for his bag. However, what happened next was the last thing he had expected. The person had actually moved closer to him. This was a first. Everyone ran when they saw him like this, better safe than sorry after all. But here this person was standing only a few feet from him. Actually, upon closer inspection, the person in front of him obviously a very androgynous boy. You learn these to spot these types of thing in his line of work. However, it wasn't the closeness, well, not entirely. The only people that had gotten this close to him in his business suit were for the most part very dead. But no, it wasn't the closeness, he was staring him right in the eyes. No one had ever done that ever, not one of his victims. No ninja, not even anyone at Gene Company. Hell, he could hardly stand to lock eyes with himself in a mirror, and they were his eyes, damn it. Okay, enough was enough. This was starting to seriously creeping him out. Can I help you with something? He asked, hoping the boy would take the hint and steep back a bit. Haku quickly realized he was staring and quickly diverted his eye. No, that's fine, I was just out picking herbs for a friend of mine. He finished with what he hoped was a disarming smile. And without another word started to look around for where he had left his bag. Finding it not too far from where he had fallen asleep, he quickly picked it up and started to walk back in the direction of Tsunami's house. He would have to change on the way, but that wasn't the real problem. The others were going to wonder just where he had gone. However, before he could put his mind to trying to find the proper excuses, the odd boy in the clearing once again disrupted his thoughts. What the hell was he doing? He asked himself again. He should have just kept his mouth shut, let the man leave. Unfortunately, his mouth didn't seem to want to listen to him, and so he was just as shocked when the question left his mouth. Can I ask you something? He almost wished that the man said no and left. Another first. This day was getting stranger and strange, and he honestly had no idea how to respond. I guess. It sounded more like a question than an answer, but he was still trying to make sense of this whole thing. Why do you do what you do? Oh God, Haku couldn't believe he had just asked that. Of all the things he could have asked, he was sure that this one was the most likely one to get him killed. As the man just stood there looking at him, he cursed himself for not bringing Natsunban. The question hit him like a ton of bricks. Why did he do what he did? Because he was a monster, because he was good at it. No, all those reasons came later. He did what he did because he had killed the only person to care for him. It had been just a cough at first, nothing to worry about. Then came the fever. Again it was nothing, all she had needed was some rest. But as time went on she kept getting sicker and sicker. None of the doctors could tell what the problem was. And so it went on. She would slowly get worse and worse, all the while he threw himself in his studies, desperate to find something, anything he could use to help her. After months of study and research he had thought he had finally found the cure. But he had been wrong, and instead of curing her, it only sped up her illness, and because of his cure she had died in his arms. He didn't know how long he had been sitting on the floor before he was found by his mother's old teammate and founder of Gene Company, Orochimaru himself. It was there on that cold floor that he had sold his soul. Offered that if he came and worked for him that he would take care of him, make sure that the world never found out that he had killed his mother. That he could have a normal life. And like the stupid, naive kid that he had been, he had agreed. And so he became Orochimaru's repo man. Naruto shook his head desperately, trying to get rid of the memories from his past. Because I was an idiot. And with that he quickly turned around and walked out of the clearing. Haku just stood there in shock. He hadn't honestly thought that he was going to get an answer to his question, well, at least one that didn't involve him trying to kill him anyway. But it wasn't the answer that had him rooted to the ground. His eyes. He had the same eyes as he used to have, pain-filled eyes that spoke of loss like few could understand. He then looked at the retreating form of the man in front of him and silently prayed that he found his precious person soon. No one deserved to have eyes like that. And with that thought he turned around and headed off back into the forest. After all, he had his own precious person to take care of. He couldn't do this. He just couldn't, was the thought running through his head as he stared down at the paper in his hand. The smiling picture seeming to mock him. God, he had never hated his job as much as he did now. There, the smiling face of Tsunami with the word reposes written in bold red underneath. He had never had to kill anyone he had known until now. Until now everyone he had killed had just been a face and a name. No family or friends, that they weren't real people. But now, he knew her, had talked with her, had seen how much she had loved her son and father, the same love he had had for his mother. And now he was supposed to simply walk in there and cut her open, then leave her bloody corpse on the kitchen for Inari to find in the morning. How the hell was he supposed to do that after all his talk about heroes and protecting the people he loved? He would rather face off against Zabuza bare-handed than do that. But even as he was thinking that, he was running through the trees back toward Tsunami's house. Thankfully they had made camp nearby and he should be able to make it back before anyone wakes up. It had only taken 2 hours to get there, and now he stood in front of the house that he had just left. And he could already feel his blood run cold knowing what he would have to do now, almost wishing Kakashi had seen him and was coming to stop him. Not that he would, no one in Konoha would stop him. It may be unwritten, but it was still a rule: no one interferes with a repo man. And so he slowly walked up to the house and looked into the darkened window, and there she was. Simply washing the dishes from the dinner that she had prepared for them not but a few hours ago. He was thankful that he had remembered everyone's schedules. Ironically, at the time it had been to try and protect them better. Tazuna would still be at the bar and Inari would now be in bed. Hopefully he would be asleep. He really didn't want Inari to walk in on him gutting his mother. So deciding that the stealthy approach would be the best, he quietly picked the lock on the door and slipped into the dark house, thankful for the fact that the only light was the one in the kitchen and that she currently had her back to him. Slowly he made his way behind her, cursing that he couldn't just slit her throat, but this just had to be a lung and windpipe job. Before he was even ready, he was already standing behind her. His pulse quickened, and before he had even realized what was happening, both he and Tsunami were on the ground, her flat on her back, him straddling her waist. It was then he looked into her eyes, and all that he saw was terror, and he swore that he could feel what was left of his heart shatter. Not but a few hours ago they had held such warmth and compassion when she was looking at him at the end of that bridge. He couldn't take it anymore. Before, when he could just ignore that the people he had been killing were real, the looks didn't bother him. But now, coming from someone that he knew, that he had come to care for in some small way, For that person to look at him that way made him feel every bit the monster he knew he was. And so he did the first thing that came to his mind to make her stop looking at him that way. He took his scalpel and cut out her eyes. By now she was screaming bloody murder, but he didn't care anymore, quickly cutting off both her shirt and bra, and proceeded to make one long incision and two shorter ones, forming the classic Y incision, and then peeled back the skin, revealing the rib cage that protected his target. By now Tsunami's screams had become nothing more than labored breathing. He hated ribs. It took him almost 3 minutes to cut through it, and by this time Tsunami's labored breathing had stopped and she now laid deathly still. Finally he had his prize. Putting the lungs as well as the rest of his equipment in his bag, he stood and surveyed his handiwork. "Oh God, what have I done?" he asked himself as he looked down to the blood dripping off his gloves. It was then that he heard a noise come from his left. With growing dread he turned his head, and there was Inari standing on the bottom steep of the stairs, pale white, looking unblinkingly at the scene before him. He then turned his fear-filled eyes onto him and seemed to ask why. Why did he kill his mother? Why had he ruined his life? Why did he betray him like this? He couldn't take it anymore. He needed to run before he did any more damage. And with that he bolted out the front door and off into the woods back in the direction that he had come from. He had no idea how long he had been standing there, and in all honesty he didn't care. Part of him even hoped that the rest of his team would find him here just so he wouldn't have to get close to them, so that he wouldn't feel anything for them. So that he wouldn't care if he ever had to kill them. Another part of him hoped that they would never know, so that he would never have to see the looks of disgust and hatred. And another part of him just wanted the earth to open up and swallow him and erase all evidence that he had ever existed. Tearing his mask off and throwing it away in an act of self-disgust, he threw it across the clearing and fell to the ground, crying images of all the other people he had killed flashing before him. No longer able to ignore the fact that every one of them had a family and loved ones just like Tsunami. That for each one he had destroyed the life of countless others, stolen mothers from their children, husbands from their wives, children from their parents, all because they had missed a single payment. So distraught he didn't even notice the person up in the trees looking down at him. He had always known that his blonde-haired student was more than he seemed, he had always assumed it was just the fact that he was the container of the Kyuubi. But as time had gone on he started to suspect that there was more than just the fox to his student's eccentric behavior. But he could honestly say that this came as a shock. To think that the son of his lat sensei, the adopted son of the legendary medic Tsunade, one of the most aspiring medical geniuses of the NEU generation, was in fact one of the most feared men in the entire village, was shocking. And here he was, the repo man, not his student, crying his heart out, and for once he had no idea what he should do. He had never lost anyone to a repossession before, though that was mostly due to the fact that everyone he had ever cared about was already dead, but that didn't change the fact that he had seen the after effects of those repossessions. Hell, he had actually watched in morbid fascination the first time he had run across the man at work while on patrol, and he could honestly say that it had shaken him just how efficient he could be. And now he was faced with a moral dilemma. If this was either Sakura or Sasuke in front of him, hell, if Naruto was wearing anything else, he would try and comfort them. But it wasn't just his student on the ground, and that was his problem. It was obvious that he was trying to keep this a secret. He doubted that even the third knew. But it was just as obvious that the boy needed help. That's when he came to his decision. Despite his student's secret life, he was still his student, and he couldn't just leave him there like that. So he jumped down and waited for the blood-soaked teen to notice him. He jumped to his feet as soon as he felt the new presence jump down from the trees, frantically trying to wipe the tears from his eyes while at the same time scanning the clearing, trying to pinpoint whoever it was that just appeared. It didn't take long to spot his sensei standing at the opposite side of the clearing. No. This was a disaster. He had been caught red-handed, literally seeing as his gloves were still covered in Tsunami's blood. He looked around the clearing desperately in some vain hope that he could hide behind it and everything would go back to the way things were supposed to be. He watched his student frantically look around the clearing like a cornered animal, and just like a cornered animal he knew that there was a very real chance that this could very well turn violent. Deciding that he was going to have to be the one start things off, he took a step forward. Well, this is certainly a surprise. Even as he said it, he was kicking himself. But honestly, what was he supposed to say in a situation like this? Naruto had finally given up on trying to find his mask. There was no point anymore, he had been found out and there was nothing he could do now. That only left two options. 1. He could try and kill his sensei. Or 2. He could pray that his teacher would keep his secret. As much as he hated having trust anyone, he knew the chances of him being able to kill Kakashi were rather small, so he would just have to hope the man knew how to keep a secret. I guess it would be. Though you seem to be taking it rather well. Well, I've seen a lot in my lifetime, though I'll admit that this definitely makes my top 10 lists. He hoped the little joke would lighten the mood a bit, but now that he was round level with the blonde, he had to admit he made a rather terrifying visage. Pacing back and forth in that black suit of his, blood catching the moonlight. He actually felt a small shiver run down his spine. Though you could say the same thing about yourself, I would imagine. All he did was glare at him harder. This isn't working, he thought to himself. Hell, looks like I'll have taken the direct approach. So busy night I take it. That seemed to get his attention as the blonde stopped pacing and was now just glaring at him. What the hell was he supposed to say to that? It was more than obvious what he had been doing. You could say that. He looked down at the blood that was still on his gloves. Anyone I know? He asked, half joking, trying to lighten up the atmosphere. However, he not expected the blonde to actually burst out laughing. And what a horrible laugh it was. He prayed he would never have to hear it again. It was too much, he just couldn't help himself. You could say that, he said in between his laughter. He then looked around for his bag. Noticing it was only a few feet away, he quickly closed the distance, grabbed the bag and opened it. Now Kakashi was on guard. The blonde was obviously not all there at the moment, and the minuet he had grabbed his bag, he got into a basic fighting stance. Naruto closed the distance between the two until he was only a few feet from his sensei. He then opened the bag and threw a plastic bag at Kakashi. Expecting an attack, he caught the plastic bag before he even registered what it was. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that he wasn't under attack. Suddenly his attention turned from Naruto to the bag in his hands. He almost threw the bag to the ground when he realized that there was a set of lungs inside of it. Anyone I know? The blonde parroted. I'm sure that you don't recognize her, but let me reintroduce you, the person whose house you've been sleeping in for the past 2 weeks. The blonde said, with no small part of madness creeping into his voice. All Kakashi could do was look down at the plastic bag with a shocked expression. That had been the last thing he had been expecting. Seems she needed a new pair a few years ago. And well, with the way Goto was running things, she started to miss payments. And well, I was in town anyway, so old Snake Face decided it was time to collect. It was almost funny that she was on the list. I mean, what are the chances? He asked. Kakashi was completely lost at this point. He had seen how well she and Naruto had gotten along, and the thought that he had only a few hours before snuck into her house and cut out her lungs made his blood run cold. Shocked, horrified perhaps. Come now, sensei, I haven't even finished my story yet, said Naruto as he retreated a few feet and started pacing again. You see, I messed up. I didn't kill her quickly enough. She started screaming. Not that I cared at that point, and when I was finished I found little Inari just standing there on the stairs, looking at me standing over his mother's body. And you know what I did? He questioned, sounding every bit as crazy as he felt. Kakashi's mouth was dry. He honestly had no idea what he was supposed to do. Here he was standing in the center of a clearing in the middle of the night, still holding onto a bag containing what used to be the lungs of the person who had been his host for the last 2 weeks. And on the other side of the clearing, one of his students still covered in blood and apparently completely insane. And here he was practicing his speech for their first kills. God, what he wouldn't do for it to have been something simple like that. No guesses. Well, no need to worry, he's fine. Well, he's alive at any rate. Though it probably would have been kinder to simply kill him there instead of having to live with those memories. In fact, I could probably get there and back in time if I pushed it. What do you think, sensei? He asked, grinning widely, all remnants of sanity having disappeared. No one ever told him when he took this job that he was going to have to deal with psychotic genin. You don't really want to do that, Naruto. Don't I? Why not? What's one more person? He turned and looked up at the moon. I have the blood of hundreds on my hands. What difference would one more make? Or two, or three, or 5, or 10, or 20? It's all the same in the end. Naruto finished, still staring up at the moon. Naruto, listen to yourself, you don't really think that. It was almost physically painful to see the train wreck of a genin in front of him, and all he could do was hope he could talk him down. You're not a monster, Naruto, you're just confused. You just need to calm down. He was never very good at this type of thing and was cursing his ineptitude. Naruto looked back at Kakashi, then down to his hands. You're right, I don't. He then gave a pointed look at Kakashi. But you were wrong too. I am a monster, I'm worse than the Kyuubi. He's a force of nature. He kills because that's what he supposes to do. But me, I chose to become this. I finally see the truth. And you know what, sensei? He returned his glare back to Kakashi. Kakashi swallowed hard, not sure of where this was going, but was hopeful when he heard the madness in his student's voice gradually recede. Praying that this would end soon, as he was sure that watching one of his genin self-destruct was one of the most stressful things he had ever gone through. What? He asked, not entirely sure he was going to like the answer. I just can't seem to bring myself to care anymore. With that, he collected his mask and bag, though not before grabbing the plastic bag that contained Tsunami's lungs, and walked past a frozen Kakashi. You know what, sensei? I think that this little talk of ours was just what I needed. I feel much better now. He continued to walk, but just before he exited the clearing he turned back to Kakashi once more. Oh, and by the way, I would really appreciate if this stayed between just you and me. And with that he walked into the darkened woods and disappeared into the night. Well, there's chapter 2 for you. Not entirely happy with it, but I've already rewritten it twice and this was the best so far. Anyway, tells me what you think. Oh, and just for the record, if I don't mention it, just assume that the things I skip over happen like they do in canon. Anyways, that's it for now, and as always, reviews are always appreciated. Also, if anyone wants to volunteer to be my beta, that would be much appreciated. Night Surgeon. REPO. The Ninja Opera. Gods, what was wrong with him? Why the hell had he said all those things? He didn't really believe it. He wasn't a monster. He cared. God, how he cared. He knew what he did was wrong, immoral, even evil. But that didn't mean he was a bad person. He didn't enjoy his job. He took no pleasure in killing people. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't. But even as he was thinking this, he could hear a voice at the back of his mind telling him he was just lying to himself, that he had meant everything he had said back in that clearing. No, that wasn't me, it was just the stress talking. I just need to calm down, everything will be fine. All I need is a vacation and everything will go back to normal. Still the voice taunted him, telling him he was just fooling himself, asking him just what he thought normal was. That he would be so much happier if he just let go and accepted what he was. It had been a week since his breakdown in the woods. Thankfully Kakashi had given them some time off, to recuperate from completing such a high-ranked mission. But Naruto knew the real reason. Kakashi was worried, and rightly so, that any more stress and he would snap like a dry and brittle twig. Even Orochimaru had sensed that he had needed a break and had given him some time off. And so Naruto found himself on top of the Hokage monument, trying to convince himself that he wasn't that person back in the clearing. And so there he found himself leaning against a tree, watching the sun set over the village, holding his knees to his chest, trying desperately to assure himself that everything was going to be okay. This was the scene that Hinata walked in on. She had always admired the blonde, how he was always so happy and confident in himself, his kind heart, how even after his mother's death, and his smiles became more and more rare, he had still maintained an silent confidence. And she had admired him even more for his strength and determination to not give up on his dreams even after losing his only family. And that admiration had only grown in the last year, to the point that Hinata could admit, if only to herself, that she had fallen in love with the blonde. So when she saw him there holding his knees to his chest with such a hurt look on his face, she felt a pain in her heart. She realized that despite all his confidence in public, that he was just a person, like herself. That he felt pain and loss the same as everyone else, and she found herself even more in love with him because of it. However, no, she was faced with a dilemma. It was obvious that the boy in front of her was hurting, and if she had been any braver she would be by his side trying to comfort him. But her feet refused to listen to her, and all she could do was stand there helplessly, desperately trying to gather every ounce of courage she had in her small body. Naruto was lost in his own little world, images of all the people he had killed flashing before his eyes, the sounds of his knife cutting flesh, the feel of tearing someone's still beating heart from their chest, and all the time the voice in the back of his mind telling him that was who he was, what he was meant to do, that those were not the actions of a good person, that he was a monster, and that deep down he knew he liked it, the sounds of his knife cutting flesh, the feel of tearing someone's still beating heart from their chest. And all Naruto could do was cry and hold his knees even closer to his chest and cry out desperately. That did it for her. To hear the pain in that cry, she could no longer just stand there. Plucking every ounce of courage she had, she stepped out from her hiding spot and slowly approached the person she looked up to the most. Suddenly Naruto was dragged back to reality when he noticed that he was no longer alone. Jumping to his feet, he turned around and saw that it wasn't Kakashi like he had originally assumed. Instead of the tall gray-haired, silver if you asked him, man standing in front of him there was the girl he remembered from the academy, Hinata if he remembered correctly. Anyo, I'm sorry for disturbing you. I'm not typing stuttering, so just assume she is, Hinata said while pocking her fingers together and looking down at the ground. This was a horrible idea. He probably came up here so he could be alone. She thought to herself. It's just that you sounded so sad, and she stopped herself there and wondered just what she had planned to do. I just wanted to help. Maybe, she finished in almost a whisper. Naruto just blinked owlishly. She wanted to help him. Didn't she know what he did at night, that there was no help for him? Of course she didn't. He could count on one hand the number of people that knew the truth about him. You shouldn't bother. Some people are beyond helping. And with that he turned his back on the girl and started to walk away. Hinata was shocked. Here was one of the kindest people she had ever met, and he was saying he was beyond helping. That's not true. No one's beyond helping, she all but yelled, surprising both of them. Anyo, but it's true. She had reverted back to her shy self. I don't know why you're upset, but I know that you're one of the kindest people I know, and if anyone deserves help it's you. Oh, if only she knew what he was, what he had done, what he was going to do, she wouldn't be saying those things. You don't know what you're talking about. Again he started to walk away. Maybe, but I still want to help, she all but whispered to herself. Why was he doing this? She had no idea what she was talking about. You don't help a monster feel better. But he wasn't, at least not to her. And there it was, his answer. He wasn't a monster. The Repo Man was, but that was only a part of him. To everyone else he was just Naruto. That was his answer. He just had to think of the two as two separate identities. When he was Naruto, and when he was the Repo Man he was the Repo Man. It was as simple as that. They were two completely different people. Naruto looked over to the shy girl standing behind him. Hinata, thanks for caring. And with that he walked over to her and hugged her. They no idea just how much you helped me out there, Hinata. When he looked down he noticed that the girl had fainted in his arms. Simply frowning in confusion he put the girl down and sat her up against a tree. And backed up, gave her one last confused look, shook his head in slight confusion and started to walk away, but not before giving her another silent thank you. He was back and better than ever. He felt better than he had all week. Here, surrounded by the utter blackness of the night, perched on the rooftops like giant bird of prey, he was in his element. No longer held back by his useless sense of morality, he was free. Free to do what he wanted, free to enjoy the thrill of the hunt, free to revel in the terror of his victims, free to finally be what he had always known he was. Free to be the monster that had always been a part of him. Good, it felt good to finally let loose and be himself. He felt like laughing at himself for being so stupid as not to come to this conclusion earlier. It was perfect. No longer did he have to worry if what he was doing was right or wrong. The Repo Man didn't even know what those words meant. And that was the key. He was the repo man, not Naruto. They were two completely different people. Where Naruto was kind-hearted, he was heartless. Naruto had a strong sense of right and wrong, he had none. Naruto's dream was to be a great doctor, all he dreamt of was the next person he was his next victim. They may have shared the same body but they were two completely separate people. Well, not completely, but close enough. And to think this was L thanks to that shy girl back on the monument. Who knows how long it would have taken him to come to the same conclusion without her. He would have to do something nice for her, maybe some flowers, girls like flowers, right? He shook his head, now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. He had a job to do and it looked like his next target was about to walk into his web. He honestly had to quest on the logic behind wandering around the darkened streets of Konoha when you knew there would be a repo man looking for you. But shrugged it off, it made his job easier after all and so prepared why. Ted for the Oblivion's man to walk into his trap. Sato was drunk. He knew that this was no time to be drinking. He knew that if he had any chance of surviving he would need a clear head. He knew all of these things but that didn't change the fact that the only thing that keeping him from breaking down was the alcohol. And so he found himself stumbling down the streets of Konoha back to his house. Weaver in his drunken stupor he never noticed the slight gleam of the ninja wire lying on the ground. And so was taken completely by surprise when, with a loud twang, the wire wrapped around his left foot and pulled him up into the air so he was hanging upside down from one of the broke light posts. Too easy, Naruto thought to himself as he jumped down from his perch and landed in front of the upside-down man. By this time the man was screaming his head off, but unfortunately Naruto was content to simply let him as he pulled out one of his scalpels and began to cut away at the man's midsection, peeling back skin and fat. Still the man screamed, even more so when the blood from the now gaping hole in his torso began to run down his face. However, soon enough the screaming stopped, followed shortly afterward the sound of knives cutting away at flesh. And now Naruto stood in the middle of the street, scalpel in one hand and still warm liver in the other, and for once there was no guilt, no self-loathing. No room for anything like that, not with this wonderful feeling of joy and contentment filling him up. He felt great, he felt alive. All he wanted to do was laugh. In fact, that's exactly what he was going to do. And with that he started to laugh, not the evil dark-filled laugh from back in the clearing, but one filled with joy and contentment. That felt good, he thought to himself as he quickly gathered up his things and started to head back to the Gene Company building to drop of the night's work. They were waiting in their usual place for their chronically tardy sensei. It had already been 3 hours, so they were expecting him any time now. As usual, Sasuke was leaning up against one of the posts with Sakura not far away pining over the last Uchiha. Then there was Naruto. He was once again fast asleep leaning up against a tree. That was the scene that Kakashi had gotten used to from his squad. However, only now did he understand just why the enigmatic blonde was always sleeping. And to be truthful, he still wasn't entirely comfortable around him. He had seen something back in Wave and it most certainly was not his student. And that made what he was about to do all the more difficult. If this were any other team he would have never considered entering them in the chunin exams. They each might have been strong in their own sense, but as a team they were lacking. This was saying nothing about the fact that both the boys on his team were to one extent or another mentally unstable, to say the least. But this wasn't just any team. He had the entire council breathing down his neck about Sasuke and showing him off to all the other villages. Then he had Orochimaru and all of Gene Company on his case about Sakura. Her contract stated that she would become their full-time spokesperson after she became chunin. Then there was Naruto. Not only had the head of the Shinobi Hospital personally petitioned him to allow Naruto to enter, something about needing to be at least chunin to join the hospital staff. He had also received a letter from Orochimaru himself requesting Naruto participate. He wasn't entirely sure what difference it made if he made chunin or not. But knowing the man, there had to be a reason. So all in all, he had the entire Shinobi Council, hospital staff and one of the most powerful men breathing down his neck. As much as he hated to do it, he wasn't suicidal enough to cross all of them. He only had to look to the sleeping blonde to see just how brutal these people could be. All he could do was hope that they didn't kill each other. And with that final thought he jumped down to present his team with their nominations. The bastard was dead, it was that simple. His fate was sealed, he would make him bleed and that was all there was to it. He may have only talked to the girl once since graduating but she had helped him, even if she didn't know it, and as such he promised himself that he would make him pay. It had taken all his entrail not to jump down there and cut his eyes out. He was currently pacing back and forth down in his basement operating room, dressed in full repo gear looking down at his most recent job. Just another merchant. Well, not just another. This particular one was made up almost completely of Gene Company organs, hence why he was down here and not up in the streets. He walked over to the closest work table and grabbed the man's file. Well, seems like we're going to be busy tonight, huh? He asked the gagged man. The only response was muffled screams and the sound of the man thrashing against his restraints. Now, there's no need to be rude, Naruto said, snickering at his own little joke. Well then, what say we get this party started? He asked before making his first incision. Soon he was working on autopilot, allowing his mind to go back to the exams he had just finished. Well, the first two parts, the third wasn't for another month. The first part had hard for him. He may have realized that he was supposed to cheat, but he would admit that he had never been the covert type and had no skills to help him. Luckily he was able to bluff his way through. The second part had been interesting but overall not difficult. They had been ambushed by some rain nin on the third day. Well, suffice it to say there were now 3 less rain nin out there. Even Sakura had been able to take one down, though it was him that dealt the kill blow. Thankfully they had an earth scroll, so they had gotten into the prelims without much problem. However, it was there that all action happened. The first match was Kiba versus some girl with 2 buns in her hair. Like any sane person, she tried to throw the match. After all, no one wants to get on that family's bad side, but Kiba was having none of that and demanded that she fought him. It was a lose-lose situation and everyone knew it. It was actually a pretty good match, but in the end Kiba was able to get close enough and was able to show everyone just how good he was with a knife. Though nowhere near as good as him, it was still impressive. Afterward it had been rather uneventful. Sakura was put in the same position as Tenten. Was being paired up with Orochimaru's adopted daughter Ino. Thankfully Ino was more than happy to take the easy win. He had been matched up against some random sand nin. She had put up a good fight, but it just wasn't enough to stop him. Not that it was a fair fight to begin with, he wasn't a repo man for nothing. Sasuke got some pushover that he had flattened in less than a minute. But it was the last fight that had gotten his ire up. Hyuga Neji versus Hyuga Hinata. It was not that he had beaten her, they were shinobi, he couldn't hold something like that against him. It hadn't even been all the talk about fate and destiny. He understood how effective psychological warfare could be. No, but the bastard had tried to kill her, the girl that had helped him out of that dark hole he had been stuck in. And for that reason Hyuga Neji was going to die. Though, now that he thought about it, he was related to Hinata and she might not appreciate him killing off members of her family. He would have to ask her. Well, either way he was street ill going to kick his ass, and if Hinata wanted it he would show him just why he was one of the most feared men in the village. The sun shone through the blinds, casting lines of light across the bed against the far wall. She didn't want to wake up. Her entire body hurt and all she wanted to do was go back to the blissful peace that was sleep. However, she knew it was pointless. She could never go back to sleep once she was awake. So slowly she opened her eyes to find herself in one of the overly white rooms of the Konoha Shinobi Hospital. Looking around, she noticed the clock on the wall and saw it was almost noon. She idly wondered how long she had been out. That was when the door opened and a head topped with wild blonde hair appeared. To say Hinata was shocked to see him would have been an understatement. "Oh, you're up," he said with surprise evident in his voice. "That's great," he said as he walked into the room and closed the door behind him. "I was told that you wouldn't be up for at least a few more hours, so I just dropped by to leave you a get well soon card. But seeing as how you're awake I'll just give it to you directly," he said with giving her one of his few genuine smiles. Hinata didn't know what to do. It was taking all her concentration to simply not faint. So she did the only thing she could think of. "Anyo, you didn't have to do that." She hated that she Didn't stop her stuttering and simply thanks him. Of course I did, you a friend, and this was the least I could do. He said while putting the card on her bedside table. He thought of her as a friend, a friend. He called her a friend. No matter how many times she said it, it still sounded like a fantasy. She was going to faint. Not in her wildest dreams did she ever think that he would simply come out and say those words. Actually, there was one other reason I wanted to talk to you. You're related to Neji, right? He asked, a bit of aggression seeping into his voice. Hinata didn't know why. He was asking about her cousin, but at this point she no longer cared. She was talking to her Naruto, it didn't matter about what to her. Yes, he's my cousin. Naruto just nodded his head. I'm fighting him in the finales, Naruto said with some heat in his voice. Hinata gasped at that. He may hate her, but he was still her cousin, and even after their match she still loved him like a big brother. And to think that the two of them would be fighting each other made Hinata feel very uneasy. The reason I bring this up is I want to know how you feel about him. I mean, after you last match. Well, if you want I could. What I mean to say, I could teach him a lesson, if you wanted me to, that is. He didn't want to come right out and ask her if she wanted him to kill her cousin for her. Hinata didn't know what to say to that. He was her crush offering to avenge her. This was something she had only dreamt could have happened. But she didn't want him to hurt her cousin. She was at a loss for words, deciding that perhaps if he didn't hurt him too much it would be okay. She slowly nodded her head but quickly added, just don't hurt him too much. Naruto just nodded. Whatever you say, Hinata-chan, he said, giving her a thumbs up. Anyway, I have to be going, but I hope you get better in time for the finals. He finished with a smile before turning and walking out of the room. Hinata couldn't believe what had just happened. Not only did Naruto think of them as friends, but he also offered to avenge her. That thought alone was almost enough to make her faint. And then he calls her Hinata-chan. Her mind couldn't take it anymore and she promptly passed out with what could only be described as a perverted smile on her face. As such, knew some pretty fucked up ways of dying. After him had been Kiba against Shino. Again Shino did the same thing and tried to forfeit, and again Kiba was having none of that. Thankfully for the bug boy, the ref had called the match before there had been too much damage done. After that it had been Ino against Shikamaru. He hadn't even bothered go down to the arena, and again Ino seemed happy with the easy win. Finally it was Sasuke's turn. He ended up fighting one of the genin from grass. It had been close. Grass nin were known for using poisons, but Sasuke was able to out a win anyway. The second round was interesting. First was him versus Kiba, and he knew that although Kiba would probably complain, Orochimaru wasn't going to kill off his best repo man just because he roughed up his son a bit. Kiba was strong, he would give him that, but he was a brawler. It had been simple to avoid him, and though he had gotten cut up a bit he had still been the clear winner. Ino had simply forfeited her match against Sasuke. She, along with half the female population, was gunning for his heart and had no desire to jeopardize that on something like this. And so it came down to the two of them. It had been by far the best fight in the entire exam. Sasuke was F.A. Saint and with his Sharingan bloody hard to hit. But he was fast too, and he knew the human body better than anyone. He knew how to read people's movement, almost like having his own Sharingan. In the end he had come out on top, but only just. And there, of all the organs, this one was by far his favorite. Quickly putting it in a plastic bag and then in the cooler section of his medical bag, he stood up and started to walk toward his home. It was late and he would deliver the heart to Jean Company tomorrow. Well, you seem to be doing better, came a voice from one of the dark side streets. How kind of you to notice, sensei. And yes, I do feel much better, shot back Naruto with a grin on his face. I glad to hear it, you had me a little worried back there, he said in a bored tone. Yes, I really should apologize for that. You caught me on a rather bad night, I'm afraid, said Naruto with a hint of mocking condescendence in his voice. I could tell. However, as fun as this is, I was sent to tell why. Oh, you, the Hokage wants to see you in the morning. If Naruto didn't know better, he could have sworn he actually heard the stupid eye smile of his. I see, and by me do you the genin or the repo man? Naruto asked, hoping that it was the latter. The genin, of course. Why would he want to talk to a repo man? Kakashi asked, amusement very evident in his voice. You know you're not nearly as funny as you think you are. Naruto said, giving him the stink eye. Oh, I don't know about that. Lots of people have commented that I have an excellent sense of humor. Have you ever thought that maybe it's you lacking in that department? He asked in a rather smug tone. I really don't like you sometimes, stated Naruto before he started walking away. It was early the next morning when Naruto arrived at the cage tower. However, it seemed that he wasn't the only one to get an invite. Standing in the lobby were both Sasuke and Kiba. Sasuke was standing on a corner trying to ignore every. Kiba sitting in one of the benches with his feet up. Though when Naruto walked in, he sent him a death glare. This was obviously about the chunin exams, and seeing as they were the only ones there, it was likely that they had passed. As it turned out, he was right, and all three of them had become chunin. Deciding that some kind of calibration was called for, he looked at the two other new chunin and decided that it would probably be best to not even ask them if they wanted to join him. Hinata had been up early training, trying to make up for the lost time she had been in the hospital. She was still stiff and out of shape, but it had been getting better. So it was no surprise that she didn't notice the person sneaking up on her. Suddenly a blob of orange and yellow was all she could see. Hey Hinata-chan, guess what? Asked the blob that she quickly realized was Naruto. In her surprise, all she could get out was, what? I just made chunin and I've decided that this calls for a celebration. The blonde said, nodding to himself. So come on, let's go get something to eat. And with that, the blonde grabbed his hand and started dragging the girl into the village. A little shorter than the last one, but this nay was mostly fluff. I know I'm not good at fluff, and that kind of thing just doesn't get my blood pumping like a blood, gore and psychotic breakdowns, but what are you going to do? Also, I'll admit that this was more of a filler chapter. But I needed to set things up for the next part of the story. Anyway, just in case it wasn't clear enough, Naruto has a kind of split personality disorder. Though, they're not really two different people, they're more like two different sides of the same person. Or something. I'm probably not making any sense, I'm sure. Also, if any of you are good at drawing, I would really love some fan art. Before I forget, be prepared for a time skip for the next chapter. Anyway, that's it for now. See you guys next time. And as always, reviews are always appreciated. Character list should be obvious to anyone who's seen the movie. Nathan, Naruto, Blind Mag, Sakura, Luigi, Kiba, Amber, Ino, Pavi. You'll just have to wait and see. Roddy, Orochimaru. I didn't know I'd love you so much. Repo, the ninja opera. How long had he been doing this? He honestly could no longer remember a time that he had not been covered in the blood of others. He knew once, long ago, there had been a time. But it seemed so distant, so long ago, that it seemed more like a dream now. He did remembered his mother though, how she had found him on the street, how she had taken him in, how she had cared about him, how she had loved him. How he had killed her. That image was still, crystal clear. How she fainted, how she had bleed out, how she had died, how all he could do was cry and beg her not to leave him. No, he couldn't do this now. That had been years ago, he was over it, he had moved on. He had to stop living in the past, he had a life. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was his and he was doing the best he could. He had just been named the head surgeon at the hospital. At 18 he was youngest on record by almost 6 years. He was celebrated as the greatest medical genius, surpassing even his own mother, the legendary Tsunade. And on top of that, he had been dating the love of his life for the past 3 years. Just the thought of her smiling face was all he needed to get him through the day. But, still there was this monster casting its shadow over his happy life. Being a repo man hadn't bothered him for many years, it had become second nature to him by now, but he had no delusions as to what would happen if the world found out. He would be dismissed from his job at the hospital. After all, what kind of doctor goes around killing the people that he had sworn to heal? And what would Hinata think? Would she call him a monster? Would she leave him? He didn't know, and he had no intention of ever finding out. He didn't know what he would do if he had ever lost her. She had become his anchor to reality. Something normal he could cling to. Just thinking about her made the small box in his packet feel all the heavier. It had been there for almost a month. He had tried to ask her on more than one occasion, but the word would never leave his mouth. He loved her too much to ask her to marry him. How could he? Not while he was still a repo man. It wouldn't be fair to ask that of her. Of course the answer was obvious to the uninformed. He could just quit the repo game, and it wasn't like he needed the money. But it wasn't that easy. He had been doing this for over 7 years now. It was a part of who he was good at it. He even found himself enjoying it from time to time. He didn't know if he could even give it up even if he wanted to. Not to mention the little fact that Orochimaru would not take his retirement very well. He wouldn't put it past the snake to make him disappear. But these were a problem for another time. He was still a repo man and he had a job to do. It had almost become too easy. Time and again he would find his targets just walking the streets. They had to know that he was coming after them. You don't just forget something as important as if you had paid your bill that month. But still they walked out in the open, and they were always surprised when he showed up. Not that he really cared, but he still had to wonder at the collective intelligence of the civilians. It wasn't even like it was just Konoha either. Over the years Gene Company had grown by leaps and bounds, and now there were Gene Company offices in every major village in the world. And of course as Gene Co. grew, so too did Repo, and as his senior repo man it had been his job to train the new batch of repo men. At the end of that little project he had turned out almost 20 new repo men. He had also come to the conclusion that he hated teaching and had to wonder just how Kakashi had done it. He was getting distracted again. He shook his head. He had gotten distracted again. There was a spinal column down there that had his, well, Gene Co's name on it, and it wasn't just going to cut itself out. So as quietly as he could he ran up behind the man and slammed his head into the wall of an adjacent building, knocking the man unconscious. From there it was simple to peel the skin and muscle from around the man's spine. The hard part was cutting the spine from the base of the head and the hips. But this wasn't his first, and he had already done this procedure that it only took him a few minutes. Finished, he packed up and walked off in the direction of his house. He was having lunch with Hinata and wanted to get a few hours sleep before. It had been another long day. 3 surgeries in a row. Sometimes he thought that the director and Orochimaru were conspiring together to see just how little sleep he could run on. And that wasn't the worst of it. No. Instead of heading home to try and get a few hours sleep, he was being forced to appear at some benefit dinner the hospital was hosting. At least Hinata would be happy. It had been a while since she had had the chance to dress up. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't even notice the person in front of him until they were both on the ground. Sorry, he mumbled to the person while trying to collect the papers he had dropped. It's fine, Naruto. Besides, it's been a while and I wanted to see you anyway. Though this wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I had planned on running into you. She laughed. She wasn't lying. It had been almost 2 months since they had last talked. He and Sakura had actually become rather close friends. It had been hard at first. His free time was at a premium between the hospital and his night job, but they had somehow made it work, often having lunch together, along with Hinata sometimes. However, as time went on, both had gotten more and more caught up in their work. He had gotten more and more involved with his work at the hospital. And she, after making chunin, had become Gene Co's full-time spokesperson, as well as becoming one of the greatest singers in the village, found her own free time diminishing. But still they had been able to meet every now and again and had stayed friends. Not that it was that surprising. Sasuke had disappeared into the unnamed ranks of Anbu some years ago. Not that he was ever really up for making friends. Then there was Kakashi. He still didn't know how they had convinced him to become Hokage, though knowing him they either bribed him with copious amounts of smut or they had blackmailed him into it. In any case, they had never really gotten on that well, so he didn't really mind not seeing him all that often. It has been a while, hasn't it? He asked sheepishly while rubbing the back of his neck. Sakura could only shake her head at her old teammate. He really was one of the oddest people she knew. Well, maybe not as weird as Orochimaru and his kids, but that wasn't exactly saying much. Yes, it has, but don't worry, we're both busy people, and besides, I imagine I'll be seeing you at the party tonight. After all, the hospital's holding it. And you are their golden boy after all. She laughed a little at the nickname. You're going to be there. I don't suppose you know what the whole thing's about. No one bothered to tell me. He wasn't really all that surprised that she was going. She was the face of Gene Company after all. Of course, this whole thing has something to do with some kind of new painkiller or something, I'm not entirely sure. But whatever this new drug is, it's made by Gene Company, so I've got the job of presenting it to everyone. She said with a shrug of her shoulders. Well, that's news to me. It's a little odd to be holding a party just for a new drug, but whatever, and it will give Hinata a chance to dress up so she'll be happy. It was actually kind of odd that he hadn't heard anything about this. He spent enough time around the building. Anyways, I just wanted to see if you were going to be there. It would have really sucked if I had been stuck alone in a room full of people I didn't know. She finished with a warm smile. Don't worry, me and Hinata will be there to save you from all the perverted old men. He laughed. Sakura just shook her head. You really are an oddball, Naruto. Anyway, I have to get moving, but I'll see you tonight. And with that she waved bye to him and walked past him. He turned. See you tonight. Naruto had forgotten just how much he had hated getting dressed up. There were only 2 suits he felt comfortable in, his hospital scrubs and his repo suit. Unfortunately, this was a formal event and scrubs were out of the question, and he didn't think that his repo suit was exactly formal either. Stop fussing, said Hinata in frustration. Fine, but you know how much I hate having to wear this monkey suit. He whined. Even after all these years, still found herself shaking her head at her boyfriend. Really, it's not that bad, and Bessid. You only have to wear it for a few hours, and if you behave yourself I might even help you out of it, if you know what I mean. She said with a coy little smile. It had taken a few months for her simply stop stuttering whenever she had been around him, but eventually she had opened up, and well, the rest was history. That got him to stop fidgeting with the Western-style suit. Well, with incentive like that I think I can be convinced to behave for a few hours, but you know I'm going to be a bundle of pent-up energy when we get home. He said with a cocky grin. Hinata just laughed it off and grabbed his arm as they continued walking down the street toward the hospital. Despite what most people think, Naruto had never been overly conferable in large crowds. It had only gotten worse over the years. He had become accustomed to being on his own for most of the time. Not to mention he spent almost half his time as a repo man, and they weren't exactly known for their social skills. Still, he had Hinata by his side. And at least he wasn't the center of attention here. No, that honor belonged to someone else. It wasn't often that Orochimaru made a public appearance, but this was his drug. They were debuting, so it was only expected that he be there. Unfortunately, that also meant that his kids were there as well. Kiba was in one corner hitting on anything with 2 legs and the right reproductive organs. Ino was off to the side, surrounded by a number of other girls, most likely talking about her latest surgery. Then there was Kabuto, by far the freakiest one of the lot. Somewhere along the line his face had become horribly scared, however that was nothing compared to how he had remedied the problem. Instead of getting regular plastic surgery like most normal people, he went arrow. Stealing women's and stretching them over his own and attaching them with clips he had surgically installed. He was also by far the vainest person he had ever met, as evident by the fact that he was currently off in a corner by himself, simply admiring himself in a mirror. However, he didn't really care about them. They had an unspoken agreement: don't mess with me, I don't mess with you. It also helped that even they knew that their father would be less than happy if he lost his head repo man. However, his thoughts were soon cut off as the light dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage. Apparently Sakura was up. He wasn't really an opera person, but even he had to admit that Sakura really was an excellent singer. The night was almost over. As it turned out, this whole night's even tea had been about some new painkiller called Z-Hydrate. It had looked promising, but he knew better than to take anything that Orochimaru had made at face value. Still, the night had been almost enjoyable. He got to spend some much-needed quality time with Hinata, as well as having the chance to catch up with Sakura. However, he knew his luck couldn't hold out too long. He wasn't surprised to see the Orochimaru was now making a beeline for him. He knew that this wasn't going to be pleasant, and with Hinata standing beside him, he couldn't even act like he normally would. "Ah, Naruto, my boy, it's so good to see you again. I was almost afraid that you'd be too busy to make it. After all, the way I hear it, you always seem to be busy doing one thing or another." He greeted with a hint of amusement in his sickeningly slick voice. God, he had never heeded the man and his games more than he did right now. It's good to see you as well. What's it been, almost 2 years now? Orochimaru had him a position as one of his lead doctors at Gene Company almost 2 years ago. Naruto had politely refused. That had been the last time they had talked in public. Of course, as his lead repo man they talked with each other at least once a month. And as for being busy, well, what can I say? Every time I find myself with some free time, something else always seems to pop up. Yes, I know how it can be. I seem to be finding myself with less and less time to myself. But enough about me. Now why don't you introduce this lovely lady on your arm? With a predatory glint in his eye, Naruto groaned in his head. Of course he would bring Hinata into this fucking snake. Oh, how rude of me. Orochimaru, this is my date, Hinata Hyuga. Hinata, this is Orochimaru. He was on the same squad as my mother. In fact, he's probably the closest thing I have to family now. Let's see how you handle that, you snake-faced bastard. He thought to himself. Orochimaru just laughed quietly. Yes, I guess that's true. In fact, I've always thought of you as my favorite nephew. The way he said it almost made him sound genuine, but Naruto had been around the man long enough to know when he was just having fun. Quote, "But how rude of me to ignore such a beauty," he said as he took Hinata's hand and lightly kissed the back of her hat. "It's a pleasure to meet you, and might I say it's about time my little Naruto-kun found someone," he said as he released her hand. He turned back to Naruto. "You're a very lucky boy, Naruto. A girl like this only comes along once in a lifetime. You'd best hold on to her before some else sets their eyes on her." He smirked at his own veiled threat. Naruto unconsciously held Hinata a little tighter. "They're welcome to try, but I'm hardly a pushover." He was losing their little game and he knew it. Of course. I would expect nothing less concerning someone as beautiful as her. He smiled at the end, indicating that the game was over and that he had been the clear winner. "However, as much fun as this had been, I really must be going. But before I do, I just wanted to let you know that my offer still stands. After all, Gene Company is always looking for people with talents like yours." And with that he bid them goodbye and walked off into the crowd. "I didn't know you were so close with him," Hinata said, bringing Naruto's thought back to the real world. "I don't know if I would say that we were close, per se. But I have known him for some time now and as such just know how to talk to him." Hinata just nodded her head in understanding. "Now I believe that you promised to help me get out of this stupid suit if I behaved, and as far as I can tell I conducted myself as a perfect gentleman." "So?" he asked with a playful look. "Did I? I don't seem to remember saying anything like that. Are you sure you didn't just imagine it?" she asked innocently. "Oh no, you don't. You're not getting out of it that easily." And with that he grabbed her arm and started to run home, Hinata right behind him. He hated how complicated this was. He loved her, she loved him. It should have been as simple as that. He wanted to be with her forever, he wanted to marry her, he wanted to settle down and start a family. But that was the thing, besides the fact that he would never be able to keep his other life a secret from her, it wasn't fair to ask her to marry him when she didn't even know about that part of him. The only way he would be able to ask her would be if he quit. And that thought just brought up other problems. The biggest was that he knew that Orochimaru would be less than pleased at the thought of losing his best repo man. Not to mention part of him simply didn't want to stop, and if he was being honest with himself he wasn't entirely sure that he could even stop if he wanted to. He had been a repo man longer than he had been a ninja, and doctor it had become a part of what he was, and he didn't think he could just give that up, not even for Hinata. He was just so confused. He needed some advice. But the list of people he could go to was unsurprisingly short. Orochimaru was out for obvious reasons, and the only other person that knew his secret was Kakashi. He was hesitant to go to the man with his problems. He could always ask the person he was stalking, but he doubted that he would be much help. No, he would just have to work this out on his own. However, until then he had a job to do. Deciding that he wasn't in the mood to listen to the man's screams, he simply stabbed the man in the base of the skull before he even knew what was happening. Laying the man down on the ground, he simply cut away all the skin and muscle around the man's stomach. He was just there for his large intestines, so nothing else needed to be done. Afterward he packed up and started back to the Gene Company building still trying to think of a solution to his problem. He had to hurry though, he didn't want Hinata to wake up and find that he wasn't there. He was lucky that she was a heavy sleeper and so far hadn't woken up to find that he wasn't there, though knowing his luck it was bound to happen sooner or later. It had been a week since the party at the hospital in Naruto. Tu and Hinata were having lunch together at a small restaurant near the hospital. He still hadn't decided on what he was going to do. He simply couldn't come to a decision one way or another. It was like he was fighting a never-ending war inside himself, the Naruto that loved Hinata with all his heart on one side and the repo man on the other. However, currently his thoughts were on the odd behavior of the girl sitting across from him. Not only had she reverted back to the shy girl she had first been when they became friends, she also seemed paler for some reason. He wasn't sure what the problem was, but he was sure something was wrong. "Hinata, is something bothering you? You know you can tell me anything." He was such a hypocrite. "Anyo, it's nothing," she said, staring down at her food while pocking her fingers together like she did when she was younger. Now Naruto knew something was wrong. She hadn't done that for years now. Quickly running through a mental list of the things it could be, the only thing he could come up with that would make her revert back into the nervous little girl he had met all those years ago was that she had figured out his secret. Naruto suddenly felt a cold dread take hold of his heart. She was scared of him, that was the only explanation. No, that was impossible. He had been careful, it had to be something else. But even as he though this he couldn't feel a cold sweat breaking. "I know something's bothering you, I'm sure you'd feel better if you told me." He couldn't help the tremble in his voice, it took everything he had to simply form the words. Hinata was looking very intently down at her food and pressing her fingers together so hard it was surprising that they hadn't broken yet. "Anyo, it's just, that I think I might be pregnant." The last part had come out so quiet that Naruto almost missed it. He thought his heart had actually stopped there for a second. Did he hear her right? She was pregnant, he was going to be a father, he was going to be a father. That was all he could think of at that moment. No longer did anything else seem to matter. It was at that point that all debate between his repo life and Hinata stopped. It had become so obvious that he felt like kicking himself. He loved Hinata. He already knew that he would love their child. Nothing that the repo man could give him could ever compare to that love. Hinata didn't know what to do. Everything had suddenly gone so quiet. It had been almost a minute and he still hadn't said anything. Was he happy, or angry, disappointed? She just wished that he would say something, anything. Though she hoped that he would be happy. Everything was suddenly so clear to him now. He knew what his future was now. He would marry Hinata and they would raise their child and they would grow old together and everything would be fine. It was then that he realized that no one had said anything for over a minute. It was then that he got up and walked around the tab. And got down on one knee and took both her hands in his hand. "Hinata, you've just made me the happiest man in the world right now," he said, looking up into her eyes that were already starting to water over. He then reached into one of the pockets in his pants. "I've been waiting for the right time to ask you this, and it ought that a better one is going to come along anytime soon." With that, he opened the box and inside was a gold band with a number of small diamonds surrounding one large one. "Would you make me even happier?" he asked. By this time the tears were running down her face. She had dreams of this day. Had imagined it happening so many different ways, but none of them could compare to the real thing. She was so choked up with emotion that she found that she could no longer form words. All she could do was nod her head in a silent yes. Naruto slipped the ring on her finger, then got up and pulled her to her feet and hugged her like he had no intention of ever letting go. And in all honesty, that arrangement sounded just fine with him. By now Hinata could no longer stop her tears. She was so happy, nothing else mattered to her now. His odd behavior, his workaholic work ethic, the fact that he couldn't cook worth a damn. None of it mattered anymore. They were getting married and they had a baby on the way and everything was going to be fine. Naruto was in heaven, nothing could bring him down. Well, nothing but the thought of just how Orochimaru was going to take his retirement. But as far as he was concerned, he had given the man 7 years of his life and now it as time that he started to think about himself. This was it. There was no going back, no taking no for an answer. He quickly walked toward the receptionist. "Ah, hello Naruto, nice to see you again," she said in an overly sweet voice. "I assume that you here to see Orochimaru." All Naruto did was nod in the affirmative. "Well, you're in luck, he's currently free." She pushed the button that opened the doors. "Oh, and by the way, congratulations on your engagement to Hinata. She really is such a nice girl." He didn't even bother responding to the girl. His entire focus was on the man sitting behind the desk in the middle of the room. "Ah, Naruto-kun, what a surprise. I thought that you would be too busy to come and see me tonight," he greeted in his overly friendly voice. "I assure you the last thing that I wanted to do today was come and talk to you," he said with some heat in his voice. "Oh, then if you don't mind my asking, just what are you doing here then?" he asked. Naruto closed his eyes and gathered his resolve. "I want out," was all he said. "Out? Out of what?" he asked curiously. "I've been your repo man for over 7 years now and I can't keep doing this anymore. It's not like there aren't others that can't take my place." He'd try reasoning with the snake man. It wouldn't do to lose his temper this early in the conversation. "You're quitting then, is that it?" His voice didn't betray any more emotion than it normally did. Naruto just nodded his head. "That's understandable, I guess. You're in love, you have a family to consider now. You can't keep running off in the middle of the night now." Now Naruto was starting to get worried. This wasn't how he had seen this conversation going at all. He didn't understand how the man could be so calm, and the fact that he could not read any emotion in the man's voice made it impossible to tell just what the man was thinking. "I understand. Really I do. I'm a family man myself, you know. And you're right, there are others that could take our place, and you have given me over 7 years of your life, far longer than any other repo man I have on staff. Maybe it is time for you to retire. I'll tell you what, you finish up the week's work and I'll call us even. I'll even keep all you secrets, well secret." He laughed a little at the end. Naruto couldn't believe it. He was free just like that. The snake had even agreed to keep not only his mother's death but also his life as a repo man a secret. Normally he would be suspicious, but at the moment he was too happy to care. "I have to say I'm a little surprised that you're taking this so well. Not that I'm complaining, of course. No, it's quite alright. You've done a lot for me and Gene Company over the years. It's only fair that I return the favor after all." He finished with a friendly smile. "Thank you. Really, you have no idea how much this means to me," Naruto said with real gratitude in his voice as he turned and walked out of the room. It was only when the doors had closed did the smile drop from Orochimaru's face. This was not part of the plan. Naruto was the best repo man he had ever had. Not only was he skilled and by far the most effective repo man he had ever employed, but he was also the only one that had made it past 2 years without burning out. He had an entire psych ward devoted to burnouts. He had spent years molding, guiding him, trying to make the perfect killing machine, and the end product was more than he could have ever hoped for. He could kill without remorse, but unlike so many other experiments, he was still able to live a normal life. Hell, given a few more years he would have been able to keep up with him in his little word games, and that was a rather impressive feat. Just thinking about Naruto brought up thoughts of his kids. How disappointed he had become of them. Disgraces, the lot of them. Even when he wasn't comparing them to Naruto, they were failures of the greatest magnitude. He had tried to shape them into perfect replacements for when he was gone, but all he got were a bunch of egotistical sociopaths that would serve better as organ donors than were the heirs Go Gene Company. But now he had lost his one true success and he was beyond livid. No one stole from him, and that was exactly what that slut of a Hyuga had done to him, and in so doing sealed her fate. It was only a question of when and how, preferable in a way that would drive Naruto back into his arms. Well, there you go. Naruto and Hinata are getting married. Orochimaru is pissed and there's a baby on the way. Stay tuned to find out what happened. As a side note, I'll probably name the kid Shiloh, if for no other reason than I want to try and use some of the songs and her name comes up a lot. If you think that's a bad idea, let me know and I'll think of something else. Character list: Nathan, Naruto, Blind Mag, Sakura, Luigi, Kiba, Amber, Ino, Pavi, Kabuto, Roddy, Orochimaru, Marnie, Hinata. As always, reviews much appreciated. Till next time, see ya. Let the monster rise. Repo, the Ninja Opera. 2 weeks. He wasn't entirely sure just how they had done it, but he and Hinata had somehow managed to pull everything together in just 2 weeks. And now he found him's LF standing in front of the priest waiting for his bride to walk down the aisle. While he was waiting for her, he once again scanned over the group of people that had come. Neither one of them had a very long list of people that they had considered friends. Though for such a small wedding there were a lot of high-profile people. They had even gotten Sakura to sing for their reception. However, 2 men stood out above the crowd. Kakashi had shown up claiming that anything that got him out of having to do paperwork was something he wouldn't miss for the world. However, even the appearance of THE Hokage wasn't as surprising as the next guest. To everyone else's surprise, well, not everyone, Naruto knew why he was there. Orochimaru along with his 3 kids had shown up not long after Kakashi. Thankfully, it seemed that Orochimaru had told his kids that they were to sit down, shut up and not cause a scene. There were also a number of Hyuga as well as most of the higher-ups at the hospital. Still, it had remained mercifully small and low-key. However, it was at this point he was brought back to the real world as the organist started to play and he first set eyes on his love in her elegant wedding dress. At just the sight of her, all other thoughts were banished from his mind. He was stunned at just how beautiful she looked in her white dress. Her pale lavender eyes hidden by her veil, her gloved hand holding a beautiful bouquet. If he had been having second thoughts about if he had made the wrong choice, they were all gone now. He knew that he had made the right choice and that no matter what the future was going to be, it would be all the better with Hinata there beside him. She had finally reached the podium and turned to face him. A small smile on her face was all he could see. But that smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and he knew that he would remember it until his dying day. The service had been simple, but in his opinion it was all the more special for it. He had just finished his first days with Hinata as husband and wife, and the 2 were now socializing with the rest of their guests. While Hinata was socializing, Naruto was just trying to become as small and uninteresting as possible. And he really didn't want to get sucked into some boring conversation where he had no idea what anyone was talking about. However, it seemed as though this was not to be, as he felt someone grab him by the shoulder and pull him back into one of the more secluded areas of the garden that they were having the reception in. He turned around ready for a fight, but came face to face with Kakashi, who was wearing his cage robe and hat along with his usual mask and slanted headband. "Yo," was all he said along with his patented eye smile. All Naruto could do was groan at his old sensei's odd behavior. "Hello, Kakashi-sensei. It was nice of you to come, surprising but nice nonetheless." It was no secret, at least between the 2, that they weren't as close as most students were to their senseis and vice versa. "Well, it's not every day that one of your old students gets married now, is it?" he asked. "Besides, it got me out of the office for the day. And that was a good enough reason for me." He laughed at his own joke. "I imagine I have enough paperwork to do on my own, and that's just for the one part of the hospital. I can only imagine what it's like for the entire village." He had become rather good at reading people's intentions from all the years of having to try to read Orochimaru, something he still had trouble with. "But I doubt that you pulled me all the way over here just to complain about your workload. So why don't we stop acting and you tell me whatever it is you want to, so we can get back to everyone before someone starts asking questions." Kakashi's eyes suddenly hardened and the air around them thickened with tension. "I wanted to ask if you had any idea just what you've done. Do you really think that you're going to be able to keep your nightly adventures a secret from her? Have you even thought about what it will do to her when, and it is a when, she finds out that you've been living a double life, that there's a completely different side to you that she had no idea about when she had agreed to marry you?" By now Kakashi had backed Naruto up against a wall, and was looking him straight in the eye. "Actually, since the thought had crossed my mind once or twice," the cynicism in his voice apparent. "And, not that it's any of your business, I as of last week am no longer a repo man for Jinko. I had decided to somethings were more important than a job. I've decided to leave that part of my life in the past. Now I really think that we should be getting back before people start to wonder just what it was we were doing back here." And with that he stepped around Kakashi and walked back in the direction of the rest of the guests, leaving Kakashi, who was silently cursing that no one had bothered to tell I am that there had been one less repo man on the streets for the past week. It was late, well past midnight. He knew that he should be sleeping but he just couldn't. It had been this way for over a month now. No matter what he did he just couldn't get more than a few hours of sleep a night. At first he thought that it was just that he was just adjusting to not having to be out and about at 3 in the morning. But it wasn't just that. He had been restless and fidgety as well. It was only recently that he had figured out just what his problem was, and to say that he was a little disturbed by it would have been an understatement. He missed it, the thrill of the chance, the power he felt whenever he put the mask on, all of it. He missed being a repo man. It had been a part of who he had been. And for so long it felt like he had lost a part of himself. However, whenever the thought of joining back up slipped it to his mind, the image of Hinata on their wedding day always came to him and he was able to repress those thoughts once again. He couldn't do that to her. He loved her more too much to do that to her. So all he could do was keep himself busy and hope that after enough time he would be able to put that part of himself in the past for good. Orochimaru was not happy. It had been over 2 months since he had lost his best repo man. Already he had seen a difference in the number of repossessions. Even after hiring 2 new ones to take his place he had been barely able to keep up with all the people that had defaulted on their payments. Not only that, but half the time the organs they had been sent to reposes were completely butchered and unusable. He had always known that Naruto had been the best, but he hadn't realized just how much he had come to depend on him until now. It had now become his top priority to get his repo man back. But how? That was the thought that kept running through his mind. He couldn't just kill his wife and expect him to come running back to him. No, this situation called for subtlety. Maybe he could arrange an accident to kill her. It's not like it would have been that hard, but still there was no guarantee that he would get his repo man back. No, he needed something that would guarantee he got his repo man back, preferable permanently. No, this needed something more than just killing of his wife. He needed leverage, something he could hold over his head for as long as wanted. "Fuck dad, why don't you just kill the idiot and be done with it?" blurted out Kiba. "And what makes you think that I'm thinking about Naruto?" asked Orochimaru in annoyance. Sometimes he thought that it would have been better if he simply got rid of his no-good kids and started fresh. Unfortunately that was no longer an option. They're all too high profile. Someone would notice if they went missing and start asking questions. "You're always thinking of that fucking moron now," said Kiba as he threw himself across one of the couches in his father's office. "Because, unlike some people I could name, he's actually has skills outside of killing people indiscriminately." At this he glared at Kiba. "It's just a matter getting him to use those skills for us. Then fuck, I don't know. Just threaten his wife and kid or something," Kiba said, throwing his hands up in the air in exasperation. Had never really liked the fact that his father spent so much time thinking about the blonde. "A good idea, if a little blunt, except for the fact that I would much prefer not pissing of a man that knows how to kill someone better than most seasoned chunin." Honestly, how stupid could he get? Despite not being an active ninja for almost 5 years, he was still one of the most skilled killers in the village, and here his boy wanted to threaten him. Was he really so foolish as to think that he would win if they fought? Given enough time he wasn't even sure if he would win in a fight. But then a thought struck him: his kid, he could use that against him. He would wait till after that cursed Hyuga had given birth, kill her, and then frame Naruto for her death. Then he would swoop in and offer him a way out. Then not only would he have his repo man back, but he would have something to hold over him for the rest of his life. It was perfect. "You know, son, sometimes I wonder just why I keep you and your siblings around." Then one of you goes and says something helpful, he said, looking at Kiba with amusement. He was frantic. It had happened last night. They had been having supper just like any other night. He had just finished telling her about his day at the hospital. Nothing particularly interesting had happened, but Hinata had always insisted that he tell her everything about his day. It was then that she had said that she felt faint. Although Naruto knew that this feeling wasn't exactly uncommon for pregnant women, he was still out of his char and by her side in a split second. However, the moment that she had actually lost consciousness was when he truly started to worry. So quickly he grabbed bridal style and hightailed it out to the hospital. He had to have been pacing back and forth outside of the exam room for well over 2 hours before the doctor came out. The news had not been what he had been hoping for. It seemed that Hyoden's mother had had the same problem with her sister, some obscure blood disease. He was not ashamed to admit that he had broken down there in the hospital hall. It was his mother all over again, but this time he wasn't a little 10-year-old who hardly knew what he was doing. No, he was the greatest medical genius of the century. He would find a cure, and he wasn't going to lose her. No matter what he had to do, he wouldn't lose her. And so he now found himself in the one room he had thought he had put behind him forever. It was now covered in a thin layer of dust, though the smell of blood still permeated the room. However, this was all inconsequential. This was the room that he stored all his medical equipment and the room he would be spending the majority of his time in the coming months. He had no idea how he was going to do it, but he would find a cure. It wasn't even a question in his mind. He would find a cure. Hinata would live and they would grow old together. There was no other way that this could turn out. Hours turned to days, days to weeks, weeks to months. Time had lost all meaning. To him, he had become so focused to finding a cure that he had stopped going to the hospital completely and only left the house for food and supplies. His time divided into either working in his lab or taking care of his ailing wife. The doctors at the hospital had all but given up hope and so had released Hinata so that she could spend the rest of her life comfortably at home. He had never been more grateful to his mother for teaching him the Kujibushin. Not only could he have one with Hinata all the time, but with no less than 10 working on the problem of finding a cure each day, he had been making great strides. However, time was running out. No matter what he did, he knew that she would never survive giving birth to their child, and she was due any time now. But it didn't matter. He was so close. All he needed was another day or two to put the finishing touches on it and it would be finished. However, that was not to be. He suddenly felt the sudden information rush of one of his clones dispersing. He was too late. It seemed that her health had taken a turn for the worse, and now he was in danger of not only losing his wife but his unborn child. Damning the consequences, he grabbed the unfinished cure and prayed that it would be enough. Running up the stairs 2 at a time, he was in their room only seconds after he had gotten the flood of information from his clone. He found her sitting up in the bed, coughing and looking even weaker than he had remembered. He could almost feel his heart break at just the sight of her. "No, God, no, not now," he cried, running over to her. She was coughing up blood now. Her pale lavender eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. Even without his medical training, he could tell that her time was almost up. Desperation quickly took a hold on his heart. And he knew that he had run out of time. He either gave her his unfinished cure or he let her die. He quickly leaned in over the bed to try and comfort his dying wife. He was crying now, leaning in whisper sweat nothings in her ear while hugging her close to his chest. Gently laying her back down on the bed, he turned to take the vial of medicine he had set down on the night table before giving a silent prayer that it would work. "Honey, please, can you hear me?" All he got was a small nod. "Good, good. Now please just drink this. I promise that it will make everything better." He couldn't stop his voice from cracking at the end. Again all he got was a small nod. Slowly he poured the medicine into her mouth and waited with bated breath for it to take effect. However, it seemed that not only was his medicine ineffective, but it seemed to only worsen her condition. All he could do was drop to his knees in horror as he watched his wife start to bleed out of her eyes, ears and nose, while the blood that she had been coughing up earlier only seemed to intensified. "No, no, God's no, not again," he cried out, tears freely falling from his eyes. Why was it always him? Why did he have to be the one to lose everything? Why couldn't he be happy? All these thoughts and more were racing through his mind. It was then that he looked up to his dying wife's form and his eyes went straight to her swelled stomach. If he couldn't save his wife, then he would do what he could to save his child. He refused to lose it. He needed something, anything to hold on to at this point, and if it couldn't be his wife, then it would be his child. Quickly trying to compose himself, he picked up his wife's bleeding form and carried her down to his secret operating room. The operation was simple, but it had been too much for Hinata's already weak body, and she had slipped halfway through. Now Naruto sat on one of the chairs scattered around the room with his new daughter wrapped in a blanket in his arms. However, Naruto was dead to the world. He had simply shut down. There weren't any thoughts running through his head. He didn't even notice the extra weight in his arms. All he felt was numb. Even the sounds coming from the house were muffled to the point that they were completely indistinguishable from each other. Unfortunately, in his shocked state, he was unable to sense the new presences in the house. Soon out he found himself being dragged to his feet and his newborn, being taken from him. It was then that he snapped out of his stupor. No, I can't lose her too, he screamed in his head. He struggled against the two Anbu that were holding him back. They were trying to steal his daughter, the only thing he had left of her. The only thing that he had in the entire world that let him think he was anything but a monster, and they were trying to take her away from him. No, he yelled before overpowering one of the Anbu, trying to restrain him and throwing him over his shoulder onto one of the metal operating tables in the room. He then turned and punched one of the Anbu in the face, forcing him to let go of his arm. Now free of the two holding him back, he turned to face the female Anbu that was currently holding his daughter. However, in his current state of mind, he never noticed the fourth Anbu that had been able to sneak up behind him and club him on the back of the head with the ring end of a kunai. His head hurt. Hell, his whole body hurt. He had no idea where he was. He couldn't think clearly, and the last thing he remembered was holding his daughter. His daughter. It all came rushing back to him. How his wife had died, the operation, holding his daughter, then the Anbu. They had taken her from him. He shot straight up and looked around. He was obviously in a holding cell of some sort, probably at Anbu HQ. It was a square, stone room. The only thing in the room, besides himself, was a small wooden bunk, a hanging light, and a large metal door. However, the contents of the room were the last thing on his mind. Now that he had been knocked out, his earlier numbness, the guilt started to take over. The guilt of being unable to save his wife, of killing her to save her daughter, even the old guilty of killing his mother came crashing back. He couldn't take it anymore, all the guilt, all the death. He looked down to his hands in disgust. What kind of doctor was he, when not only he wasn't able to save those closest to him, to even be the cause of their deaths? These hands weren't made to save people. They only knew how to kill. That was obvious to him now. The image of his new daughter soon came to him. Would she end up like all the others? Would he find himself staring down at her lifeless body sometime in the future? No, never. He refused to even think like that. He would do everything in his power to keep her safe. She had become the only good thing in his life now, and he would protect her from the world. He didn't care what he had to do, but she would be safe. However, these thoughts soon brought him back to his current predicament. How could he possibly protect her if he was stuck in here? He had no idea how long he had been sitting there, an hour, 2, he didn't know. However, soon the sound of metal scraping against stone brought him out of his thoughts and back into the real world, and there standing in the doorway was the last person he was expecting to see. If it had been some nameless Anbu, even if it had been Kakashi, it would have been understandable, but why Orochimaru himself was standing there escaped him. Naruto, my boy, I came as soon as I heard, he said with concern evident in his voice, something Naruto had never heard from the man before. They're saying that you murdered your wife. Though I'm sure this is just some horrible mistake. If you just told me what happened, I'm sure that I could fix this. If you just told me what happened. Normally Naruto would be suspicions of the man offering to help him, but in his current frame of mind he was desperate and more than willing to accept the help of the snake man. And so he told his story, about how Hinata had fallen ill, about how he had spent months trying to find a cure, about how it had only made things worse, about how he had to operate so that at least one of them could live. Well, that is quite a tale, and if it makes you feel any better, I agree. You didn't have any other choices available to you. Unfortunately, I doubt that many others will see it that way. You know how people are always looking for the easiest solution to their problem, always looking to place the blame on someone. Orochimaru said, shaking his head in apparent disgust for human nature. Naruto was desperate now. He couldn't go to jail, and he needed to protect his daughter, and to do that he needed to be a free man. Please, I'm begging you. I know that you can fix this. You're one of the most powerful people in the world. At this point he fell to his knees in front of the snaky man. Please, I'll do anything. Just let me be with my daughter. He was desperate. This was his one best chance to be free, to be able to watch over his and Hinata's child. Well, I imagine that if I vouched that you had no choice. That Hinata was already dying and you had been forced to make a choice between losing both of them or just one, that they might be more lenient. They may even acquit you altogether. And if you were still my repo man I would without giving it a second thought. But if memory serves you stopped working for me almost 9 months ago. And therein lies the problems. I can't go around vouching for just anybody. If I did that, just imagine all the people who would come to me for help. Then again, if you were to become one of my employees again, well then I would be only too happy to help. After all, it would be bad press if one of my employees was found guilty of killing his wife now, wouldn't it? He asked, now having trouble keeping the satisfaction out of his voice. Naruto wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what the man was asking of him. He wanted him to become one of his repo men again. The image of Hinata on their wedding day flashed before him. It had almost become a reflex to think of her whenever the thought of going back to being a repo man came up. But then he remembered that she was dead and he no longer had to worry about what she would think of him. Then the image of his newborn daughter came to him. Could he really subject her to this kind of life? Then again, if he was stuck in prison, what kind of life would she lead then? No, the answer was clear. He had no choice. He would sell his soul to the devil all over again, and this time he knew that there was no getting out of this agreement, that he would spend the rest of his life under the Snake Mon's thumb. But so long as he was able to protect her, he was fine with that. Fine, fine. I'll be your repo man. Just give me back my daughter. Please, I'm begging you. She all I have now, he said, his voice breaking at the mention of his daughter. Well then, let me be the first to welcome you back. Now let's see what I can do about this whole mess. And with that he turned back to the door and walked out, leaving a weeping Naruto still kneeling on the floor. This was his home, here surrounded by darkness, immersed in the shadows. Even after so long, the night was still there, ready to welcome him back, almost as if it had known that he would be back. Maybe a part of him had always known that he would never be able to leave her for long. The night had always been there for him, had loved him, protected him. Even when he had been younger, he had always loved the night. In many ways it had been his first love. She was the first thing to show any kindness to him when he had still been living on the streets, hiding him from the people that had wanted to hurt him, providing cover so he could steal the food he needed to survive. She had loved him unconditionally and he had loved her right back. Even after his mother had adopted him, the night was still there, waiting for him to return. And when he did, she had still loved him, hiding him in her deep shadows, giving him all the moonlight he needed to do his job. She had never judged him, was never disappointed in him, and he had loved her even more for it. And now he was back and still she loved him, hugging and caressing him in her shadowy embrace, and again he loved her even more. All he had ever wanted was to be loved, and all she had ever done was love him. It was comforting, knowing that no matter what he would always be loved. And he was committed to give the same love the night had given him all his life to his daughter. He would always be there. He would protect her like the night protected him. However, all that was in the future. For now he only wanted to immerse himself in the night and forget about everything that had happened the other day. Even here, surrounded by the loving embrace of the night, he could feel the loss of his wife deep down in his heart, almost like a black hole that was tearing him apart from the inside out. No, he couldn't be thinking about her now. He needed to focus. He couldn't get emotional now. He had a job to do, and that was what he was going to do. He had been off the job for almost a year now, but nothing had changed. Actually, people seemed to have gotten bolder than he had remembered. Normally his targets would be at least a little nervous, but there she was, just out on the street walking home from what appeared to be a party. All he could do was shake his head at the stupidity of some people. He had been worried that after so long he would be rusty, but that seemed to be a groundless worry. He was right behind her and still she hadn't noticed him, though the fact that she was drunk probably helped. However, when he reached out to grab her, his hand stopped and an image of Hinata flashed before him, a disappointed look on her face. He shook his head. He needed to do this. He had agreed to do this so that he could take care of their daughter. Once again he reached out to grab her, but before his hand even got halfway there, the image of his daughters flashed before him. The thought of what she would think of him when she got older, the thought that she would hate him, call him a monster, made his head tremble. No, he had to do this, it didn't matter what she thought of him. He loved her and this was the only way he could be there to protect her. This time his hand shot out, not giving himself enough time to think, and grabbed her by the back of her neck, then stabbed her in the lower back, effectively paralyzing her from the waist down. She fell to the ground screaming. Not even giving her a second thought, he turned her over and cut away at her shirt, revealing a well-toned stomach. From there it was a simple, almost second nature. He cut away the skin and muscle around her midsection before reaching in and moving the large and small intestines out of the way, then cut the tissue that held the liver in place before ripping it out of her now lifeless body. All in all, it took no more than 4 minutes. It seemed that his fears about going rusty had been unfounded. And that was that. The repo man was back, just as merciless as ever. That got Naruto thinking. It had been almost 9 months since he had done this last, but it still came to him so easily. It should have been harder. He had thought that he had finally banished that part of himself months ago, that he would have had to build up that persona from scratch. But apparently the repo man in him was harder to get rid of than he had thought. And perhaps that was a blessing. He could remember all the pain he had felt in the beginning, and he honestly could say that he didn't think that he could take much more and still cling onto whatever sanity he still had. But all these thoughts were distractions, and he still needed to deliver this particular liver to Orochimaru. So after he had secured his car, go in the cooled part of his bag, he stood up and started down the road, trying desperately to keep his mind on delivering his package and getting back home to his daughter. Well, there you go. So Hinata's dead, Naruto's a repo man again, and to top it all off, a new father. Anyway, that's the end of the first arc. Next up, Repo Girl. Also, though I'm pretty sure that I made it rather obvious in the story so far, Naruto's completely lost his mind by this point. Not that he was all there to begin with, so if some of his actions don't seem entirely logical or make much sense to you, well, that's why. Character list: Nathan, Naruto, Blind Mag, Sakura, Luigi, Kiba, Amber, Ino, Pavi, Kabuto, Roddy, Orochimaru, Marnie, Hinata, Shiloh. You're just going to have to keep reading to find out. Till next time, say ya, and as always, reviews are much appreciated. A New World Organ, Repo, the ninja opera Repo Girl. Just to get a few things out of the way now. 1. This takes place immediately after the last bit, just from a different point of view. 2. This is very that means I'm going to be messing with people's ages and histories. I'll try to explain things as they come. Anyway, that's it for now. So let's get this party started. How had it come to this? That was the question that Kakashi, formerly known as the Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves. He had read the report twice now, and still he couldn't understand what had happened. Somehow, in the course of 24 hours, not only had he lost one of his most promising tracking nin, though she had been out of the field for months now, it was still a blow. But even worse, one of the brightest medical minds in the village, also incidentally the husband of the now late Hinata, as well as his old genin student Naruto, had just up and quit his job at the hospital, and as far as the public was concerned had cloistered himself in his house. Unfortunately, that wasn't the half of it. It seemed that his old student had fallen back into his life as a repo man. However, there wasn't much he could do about it. As much as he hated letting Gene Company and their repo man run around doing whatever they wanted, his hands were tied. He may have been the military leader of the village, but he still needed the approval of the council to do anything involving both civilian and economical problems, and Orochimaru had almost all of the councilors in his pocket. Besides, he had seen what had happened when the Third had tried to interfere in the operations of the now single largest cooperation on the continent. They had closed their doors and waited until so many people had died that the Third had no choice but to allow them to do however they had wanted. No. If he was going to get anywhere with Gene Company and the repo men, he was going to need someone on the inside. But therein lay the problem. How the hell was he going to get someone into the repo men? He had first thought of Naruto, but had quickly written him off. They had never really connected, and he had been a repo man longer than he had been a ninja or doctor. He just couldn't trust him to go behind Orochimaru's back. So that left the most obvious method. He would just have his spy snoop around Gene Co. and the repo men and find out how they recruited new members. Now it was just a question of who. And there was another problem. There weren't many people that would willingly become repo men. Even to ninja the job seemed particularly unsavory. Pulse Orochimaru knew about most of the ninja in the village, and if one of them suddenly asked for a job he would more than likely be suspicious. No, what he needed was someone who wouldn't draw any suspicion to themselves, at least not suspicion of them being a spy anyway. There weren't many people that he could think of off the top of his head. At least none that would be able to play repo man for very long. Wait, no, that wasn't entirely true. There was one person that he could think of. Now that he thought about it, she was perfect. No one would suspect her as a spy, she just wasn't the type, not to mention she was already alienated by most of the population of the village. Having both your parents become missing nin will do that to you. And as an added bonus, she was already a clinical psychopath, so she would probably jump at a chance to be killing people every night. It was perfect. The only probable he could see was just getting her in. But that was something that they could work out later. Anko was not a people person. Never had been, never would be. Unfortunately, it seemed that this idiot hadn't gotten the memo. Hey there, hot stuff, what's a place like this doing in a girl like you? He slurred, obviously drunk. Anko's eye twitched. Why was it every time she went out to get drunk that some idiot always tried to hit on her? Just because she dressed like a slut didn't mean that she was one, she just liked to dress like one. Besides, the guy had to be almost twice her age. Ah, what's tea? He matter think you're too good for me or something? Again the 30-something man slurred out angrily. Fuck yha, she was too good for him, she thought to herself. Honestly, what kind of pervert goes around hitting on 15-year-old girls, even one as smoking hot as her? She was now getting annoyed, and that did not mean anything good for the drunk sitting beside her. Fucking bitch, who ya think ya are ignoring me? He said, grabbing her by the arm. Dumb fuck should have just walked away. Well, if he wants to play rough, so be it. She jerked her arm free from the drunk's hold and elbowed him in the gut, making him double over, then brought his fist up and hit him in the nose. The man fell to the ground holding his now broken and bloody nose. Arg, you fucking bitch, you broke my nose. He yelled out. Maybe now you'll know that fuck off means just that, she said, giving his a sharp kick in the ribs for good measure. She then turned and walked out of the bar she had been trying to get plaster in. It had been a few hours since the incident with the drunk. And Anko was now well and truly drunk, already having been thrown out of more than one bar. She was now stumbling through the deserted streets of Konoha back in the general direction of her apartment. All in all, the day had been a resounding success. She was drunk, she had been able to hurt someone, what more could she want? RTU Natalie, her day was about to get far more complicated. Just as she was about to turn down the street that would take her to her comfortable bed, a shadow jumped out at her. Instinct kicking in, she drew MPED back and got into a fighting stance. She was hardly surprised, this not being the first time some stupid villager had tried something. However, as the person soon stepped into the light, she relaxed slightly. No one in Anbu had seen fit to try and kill her yet, so that meant he properly wanted something else. Ya know, it's not polite to startle a girl like that. She was more drunk than she had thought as she heard her own slurred words come out of her mouth. The Anbu just shook his head at the obviously drunk Kanonichi SP. Why the Hokage would want to speak with someone like her, he had no idea, but his job did not require he understand the inner workings of his cage's mind, just to deliver a message. Mitarashi Anko, you are to report to the Hokage at 0900 tomorrow. Anko just stared at him blankly. Well, aren't we Mr. Straight to the point? Really now, no small talk or nothing. Fine, I'll be there now if you'll excuse me. I happen to have a sleep cycle to maintain, so I'm just going to go home now. And with that, she turned her back on the Anbu and began to wander off back to her apartment, not really in the mood to fuck with the overly stuffy Anbu like she normally would. Of thoughts of why the Hokage had called on her. Personally, it was a general rule that being called to a meeting with the Hokage was either a very good thing, like a sudden promotion, or a very bad thing. Like getting a sudden promotion then being sent on a suicide mission, and with her record it was more than likely that the outcome of this meeting was not going to be good. It was the next morning and Kakashi was in his office contemplating if anyone would notice if he just burnt the paperwork on his desk when the doors to his office were flung open and an apparently hungover Anko burst in yell. ing something about how she had never seen that man in her entire life. All he could do was wink in his case owlishly at the apparent denials coming out of her mouth. I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about, but I think you might be a little confused about why I called you here. So this isn't about the bar fight last week? She asked hesitantly. What bar fight? He asked the now flustered girl in front of him. Bar fight? What bar fight? I never said anything about a bar fight. You're getting paranoid in your old age, you should take some time off or something. But we're not here to talk about some imaginary bar fight now, are we? You called me here, so I assume that you've finally realized that I'm far too badass to be merely some random chunin and have decided to promote me to full-blown junin, right? Anko congratulated herself on moving the conversation away from what could have become rather dangerous waters. Right, anyway. I'm not entirely sure what you thought that this meeting was about. But I assure you that you're not in trouble. I actually have a mission for you. Now before I begin, I want you to know that this is entirely optional, but no matter what you decision, this meeting is classified and no matter what must stay secret. Do you understand? He asked in the best authoritative voice he had. Whatever she had been expecting, this wasn't it. By the sound of this was a very high-level mission that he was talking about here, and the fact that it was optional could only mean that it was either dangerous, incredibly difficult, or both. Sounded like fun. You bet. Her hangover disappearing at the thought of getting what sounded like a rather important mission. Glad you understand. Now what can you tell me what you know about Gene Company Mo? Specifically about the repo men they employ? He asked. Now that left her flat-footed. She may have been a bit young to have been affected by the mass organ failures that had led to the rise of the company, but she would have to be blind, deaf, and have lived under a rock her entire life to have not at least heard of them. And if he was asking about them, that could only mean that this mission had something to do with them. Nothing more than most people, I would imagine. Heck, I've never even seen a repo man in the field before. She answered honestly. Sure, she had heard stories, but that was it. I see. Well, that's not really important anyway. Now the reason that I called you here was to ask, and I do mean ask, this isn't an order, you to infiltrate the repo men organization and to be my inside man, so to speak. However, before you say anything, let me tell you that this will not be an easy assignment. Orochimaru is no fool. He's not going to take the chance of hiring one of my active ninja for of my getting a man in his organization. If we're going to make this work, you will either need to quit or be dishonorable discharged from the ninja ranks. Even then, it's no guarantee that he'll recruit you. In fact, I'm not entirely sure just how new repo men are recruited. That will be up to you to find out. Even if you are successful in joining, you should know that being a repo man is not the same as being a ninja. Believe me when I say that there's a much higher burnout rate than even Anbu. In fact, as far as I've been able to tell, there's only been one person to have lasted any significant amount of time. Now, knowing all this, do you accept this mission? Believe me, there will be no hard feelings if you decline. I wouldn't even want this assignment. He was serious too. He had been in an BU for almost 6 years before he went back to being a regular Junin, and he had no trouble saying that in those 6 years he hadn't seen anywhere near the same amount of death as a repo man would have in half that time. The fact that Naruto hadn't lost his mind yet still boggled his mind, though in all honesty he wasn't entirely sure that his old genin hadn't lost it somewhere along the way and was just a very good actor. Anko was shocked. This wasn't the kind of mission that you sent a chunin on. Hell, she doubted there were many Anbu that would be up to this. But here she was standing in front of the man who had just asked her if she wanted to infiltrate the most powerful and influential corporate entity in the world, and she had no idea what to say. On one hand, it was a mission like this that got you promoted all the way to Anbu if you could pull it off. Then again, on the other hand, he had basically told her that she would have to give up being a ninja, at last, for the duration of the mission. And not only that, but there was a good chance that the job would drive her crazier than she already was. Yeah, right. Like that's possible, she thought to herself with a snort. Who was she, kid? Ding, this sounded like the best mission in the world. Well, except for the fact that she knew that if she was found out, it was rather unlikely that there would be much of a body to find afterward. But that was fine with her. After all, it wouldn't be much fun if there was no risk. Hell, I'll take the job, it sounds like fun. Kakashi could only shake his head at her. It was obvious that she had no idea what she was getting herself into. Hell, even he wasn't entirely sure what he was getting her into, but the image of Naruto back in that clearing back in wave came to mind and the insanity he saw in his eye, and all he could do was hope that the girl in front of him didn't turn out the same way. Very well, we'll start tonight. He looked down at a stack of papers on his desk and picked one out. As of right now, you have been dishonorably discharged from the Ninja Corps of Konoha for behavior unbecoming of a ninja. You can take that however you want. Now unfortunately there's not much known about REPO, so you're going to have to spend your nights out looking for them. I would suggest starting with the residential district, it seems to happen around there the most. He told her. Enko just nodded her head. This job was shaping up to be fun. Hell, she might even get to find out who the head REPO man was. The man was practically an urban legend in of himself. Good, now get out of here. We'll set up a dead drop system ladder once you've gotten yourself settled. Enko turned to leave office, stopped at the door, gave the Hokage a mock salute and then proceeded to storm out of the office. She had been at it for almost a week now, and still she hadn't even seen one REPO man. It didn't make any sense. She should have at least seen one of them. There were at least 10 operating in the city. But the best she had been able to do so far was find the mutilated bodies of a number of villagers. She was getting frustrated to the point that just walking into the Gene Company building and asking for a job application was sounding more and more appealing. However, her frustration soon disappeared as she felt the cool metal of a scalpel against her neck. You're rather persistent, you know. It's been a week now and still you haven't given up. So that either means you're one of the more dedicated fangirls I've seen running around the city, or you have something important to say. If I were to guess, I'd say it was former. But I could be wrong. So which is it? The person standing behind her asked. Shit. How the hell did this guy sneak up on me? She screamed in her head. It was then that she took the chance of looking over her shoulder. It's him. Again she screamed in her head. Out of all the REPO men she had thought that she would run into, the head of the REPO branch of Gene Company was the last on the list. However, the feel of the sharp metal on her neck soon brought her out of her inner musings and back to why she was there in the first place. Right, well, it's just that I'm kind of looking for a job, and well, I thought that I could, you know, be a REPO man, air person. Fuck, what was wrong with her? She sounded like some scared little girl just now. Stupid girl, do you have any idea just what it means to be REPO? Don't answer. Of course you don't. If you did, you wouldn't be here asking me this. Was all the reply she got. That did it. All nervousness left at being insulted and was replaced by a feeling she was far more accustomed with. Hey, fuck you. I'm not just some stupid little girl. I'll have you know that I was a chunin level ninja until recently. And I know damn well what REPO men do. Fuck, I've already got a body count that would make most chunin look like pussies. A slight exaggeration, but it's not like she hadn't killed anyone either. Is that so? Well then you'll have to excuse my ignorance. I wasn't aware that I was talking to an experienced killer. The amusement in his voice was not lost on her. He removed the scalpel from her neck and turned her around so she was looking him straight in the eye. She had to look to do that, but that was beside the point. Now then, other than what I'm sure is an impressive body count. Why exactly do you think you would make it in REPO? He asked, still with a hint of amusement in his voice. Shit, she really didn't have much else then that qualified her for REPO. Actually, yes. He didn't even know what the hell they looked for in REPO man candidates. Fuck it, just go with your strengths. I'm not squeamish around blood if that helps. I'm also pretty damn good with a blade if I do say so myself. She said proudly, hoping that that was what he was looking for. He just stood there looking at her in silence. It was actually starting to get creepy and she couldn't help that she was starting to fidget. Fine. You think you can cut it, then show up at the Gene Company building tomorrow and hand the receptionist this card, then we'll see how things go. With that he gave her a red plastic card no bigger than a business card, and turned away and started to walk off. Wait, is that it? I just show up and bam, I'm in? She asked in confusion. Of course not. That card will get your foot in the door. After that you'll have to meet the boss man and convince him. He finished, and not even waiting for her to respond he turned around and walked out of sight. Enko paled at that last bit. She had never talked to the man personally, but she knew of his reputation. And she really did not want to get on his bad side, of which she was sure being found out as being a spy for the Hokage would be a surefire way of doing just that. Still, she knew that this was going to be a dangerous mission when she had agreed to take it. She was just going to have to try be convincing and hope the man bought it. Alright, so here's my continuation from my last story. As you can see, it's Anko-centric, though Naruto will be playing a large role as well. As you can see, I've made Anko younger than Naruto. Also, instead of being Orochimaru's apprentice, her parents were missing Nin. But other than that, it's basically the same Anko we all know and love. Also still looking for a beta, so anyone wants to volunteer, let me know. Anyway, that's it for now. Let me know what you think, and as always, reviews are always appreciated. What chance has a 17-year-old girl? REPO. The ninja opera. REPO girl. She had never really noticed until now just how big the Jean Company building was, mostly because ninja weren't allowed to run across the roof of the building unlike the rest of the village, and so had never had a reason to be this near the complex. To say it was large would have been an understatement. Its highest point was easily twice as tall as the Hokage building, and the entire complex stretched out for almost a quarter mile. Also, the Jean Company building was much darker, being made up of mostly steel and concrete, instead of the stone most of the other buildings in the village were made of. This had the effect of making the whole thing stick out against the backdrop of the village, making it look like the complex wasn't even part of the same village. However, she soon squashed any nervousness that the building inspired. She couldn't afford to lose control of her emotions now. She had a meeting with one of the most powerful people in the world, and she couldn't let him even get a hint of her true reason for being there. After all, this is a guy that will harvest people's organs if they even miss one payment. At that thought, she once again was thankful that she had never fallen into the whole new organs as a fashion statement. So plucking all the courage she was able to, she threw on one of her patented sexy smirks and walked in through the door. The outside of the building was rather misleading, at least when it came to building expectations about just what the inside of the building was going to look like. Unlike the dark and dreary feel one got from looking at the outside facade, this inside looked like what one would think a hospital should look like. Clean tiled floors, white walls and ceiling, with everything being lit by a number of fluorescent lights. It was actually a little disorienting. Something that was probably done on purpose, though for what reason she had no idea. Shaking off her unease, she looked around what looked like a hospital waiting room before walking over to the nurse that was manning the front desk. The gentleman sitting behind the desk just ignored her as she approached. "Hi, I was told to give this to the person at the front desk," she said, handing the red card the repo man had given her the other night to the girl on the other side of the desk. She took one glacé at the red card and suddenly straightened up. "Of course. Now let's see." He then turned to the schedule book to the side and began to leaf through it. "Okay, Orochimaru-sama is waiting in his office. Just take the elevator to the top floor and talk to the secretary there." "Thanks." And with that, she simply walked past the girl over to the bank of elevators, and after a short ride she was now standing in a much more luxurious waiting room. Not paying her surroundings any mind, she walked up the receptionist. However, before she even had a chance to open her mouth, the woman at the desk cut her off. "Ah, Miss Mitarashi, we've been expecting you," she said with a friendly smile. "You have? Wait, how do you know who I am?" Now she was confused. Sure, her name wasn't exactly top secret, but she knew she had never been here before. The receptionist just laughed lightly. Now that would be telling. "Now I believe you have an appointment to keep. Don't want to keep the big man waiting, do we?" And with that, she pushed the button to open the doors to Orochimaru's office. Right." And with a slightly bemused face, she walked into the office of one of the most powerful men in not only the county but the entire world. And there he was sitting behind his desk, giving her what she could only assume was a friendly smile, though it seemed almost predatory to her, but that might have been her imagination playing a trick on her. However, soon she realized that they weren't alone. Standing off to the side was the same repo man she had met on the street. "Ah, Anko-chan, I'm so glad that you could make it. I was almost afraid that you weren't coming," he greeted in his overly friendly way. She wasn't quite sure how to respond to that, not to mention no one had called her Anko-chan ever, and to hear someone like Orochimaru call her that threw her off her balance a little. However, it only took a moment to regain her composure. Like I would pass up a chance like this. I'm glad to hear that, really. It's not very often that I get someone with shinobi training wanting to join my little organization. For some reason they seem to find what we do. He paused to think of the right word. Distasteful. It was true, she knew. Most ninjas she knew found the whole idea of repo men distasteful. It wasn't so much that they killed people, after all shinobi did the same thing every day. But most ninjas saw themselves as defenders of their village and did what they did out of duty. Whereas repo men were seen as people who were only concerned about themselves and killed for profit only. Even Anko saw the hypocrisy of that, but nonetheless it was the view of most ninja. Well, I'm not most people. Besides, what the hell else am I supposed to do, become some merchant or something? Well, fuck that. Coo. I must say I do admire you, Spunk. Now on to business. This he pulled out a file folder from a stack on his desk. I've already read through your shinobi record and I must say that I'm impressed. After all, not many people make pass their first chunin exam, wouldn't you say? At the end he turned to the repo man standing off to the side. Not to mention the fact that even at your young age you already have a number of successful A-ranked missions under your belt. It makes me wonder just what Kakashi-san was thinking dismissing such a promising young Kanonichi. I don't suppose you would be able to shed some light on that. Still, he kept a friendly smile on his face. Not a hint of accusation in his voice. Anko was left flat-footed. How the hell did he get a copy of my records? They're supposed to be sealed and only other ninja are supposed to have access to them. She thought to herself. Then there was that look he gave the only other man standing in the room. It was obvious he was referring to the man's own chunin exam, which meant that he passed his own chunin exam on his first try as well, so obviously he was, at least at one point, a ninja as well. Then finally the man all but called her out as being a spy for the Hokage. However, our shock only lasted a fraction of a second before she was able to compose herself and answer him. Fuck if I know. All I did was start a few bar fights and the one-eyed bastard gets all bent out of shape. Coo. Yes, your file dose mentioned that you don't exactly play well with others. He chuckled at his own little joke. Not to worry though, you'll find that here at Gene Company we're a bit more accepting of people's quirks. So long as you get the job done, everything else is inconsequential. He looked back to the repo man at his side, then back at Anko. Now, seeing as how you're still here, I'll take it that you're sincere in joining up, so just let me say welcome Gene Company, and that I'll be watching your progress very carefully. After all, there's only 2 other repo men with shinobi training, Ri and Konoha, and I'll be expecting great things from you. Oh, and Naruto-kun, I'm trusting you with her training. After all, you are the best, and who better to learn from? The repo man. Naruto apparently just nodded and signaled for her to follow as he started to walk out the door. Naruto, where have I heard that name before? She asked herself as she followed the repo man back to the elevators. It was only once the doors had closed that he spoke. You shouldn't have come. I honestly had hoped that whatever common sense you had would have told you that this was a bad idea. His voice was muffled by his mask, but he still sounded young. Well, what are you going to do? Besides, like I told the big guy upstairs, what else am I going to do for work? She was a little annoyed by the man standing beside her. She wasn't a little kid. She knew what she was getting herself into. The way you dress, I could think of a few professions. A joke. She had never thought that the day would come when she heard a repo man make a joke. Don't look so surprised. Repo men are just as human as ninja. Anyway, seeing as how there's nothing I can do about it now, I might as well show you around. At the doors to the elevator opened up in what appeared to be the basement of the building. Come on, the entrance is just this way. And with that he walked out of the elevator and walked down the poorly lit hallway. Until he reached a dead end. However, after pressing a number of random-looking bricks, a section of the wall opened up to reveal a well-lit corridor. Simply signaling her to follow, walked down the hall and opened up a frosted glass door to what seemed like some kind of lounge. This is our head office. Over there, he pointed to one of the doors on the right, as the training room. You'll be spending a lot of time in there for the next few weeks. And over there, he pointed to another door at the back of the room, as the entrance to the tunnels that go under most of the village. Finally, there's the meeting room, storage room, and my office, as well as a number of operating rooms on the lower level. We also have a dormitory downstairs, but most people prefer to sleep at home. He pointed out the direction of each room as he named them off. Now come on, we still have some work to do to make you an official repo man, girl. And with that he walked over to the door he had pointed out lead to his office and opened the door for her. Taking a seat behind his desk, he rummaged through a beat-up filing cabinet for the proper paperwork. Here, all you need to do is read this over and sign wherever it tells you to. With that he tossed a number of papers at the girl. Now while you're doing that, let me just give you a brief run though of what your training will involve. Thankfully you've already made your first kill, so we don't have to worry about getting you used to that. Instead you'll be shadowing me for at least a month from Monday to Friday. At the same time you'll need to read up on not only anatomy but basic medical knowledge. I'll give you a list of books to read before you leave, but you'll be expected to read them on your own time. Once I think you're ready, and only when I think you're ready, will we move on to hands-on training. We'll start out with cadavers and work our way up until you're ready to go out into the city and kill your own targets. At this point I'll be the one shadowing you for a week or two. If after that everything looks good, I'll say you're good to go and you'll be working solo from then on. Overall this should at least take up to 6 months. Any questions? No good. Once you're done there we'll get you set up with some proper equipment and a uniform. That caught her attention. Even Ninja, who in general dislike very thing Repo, had to admit that their costumes were pretty badass, and now she was going to get her own. Not even reading the rest of the papers in front of her, she signed her name wherever it was required. Well then, what the hell are we waiting for? Let's go. Naruto just chuckled at her enthusiasm. Well, someone's excited. He got up out of his chair and opened the door to his office and add her to the door. He said, lead to the storage room. You'll find a locker with your name on it. You'll find your uniform as well as your basic equipment in there. Once you're suited up we'll head out. Right, whatever you say, boss man. And with that she ran into the room with barely controlled glee. It only took her a few minutes to change into her new uniform, and it was even better than she could have possibly hoped for. The mask was very similar to Naruto's, only there was no bottom so her voice wasn't muffled. However, where his was bulky and completely covered him from head to toe, hers was almost a polar opposite. A black leather shoulder-less dress that went down to mid-thigh, as well as a black vinyl apron that was just as long, as well as a pair of black boots and gloves. Picture in profile. Good. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's go. And with that he turned and walked out the door at the back of the room that he had said lead to a number of secret tunnels that lead to various places in the village. She was a little put off that she wasn't able to get a rise out of him. Hell, she was sure that she would be able to catch the attention of a blind gay man in this thing. So what exactly are we doing tonight? She asked. He threw a piece of paper at her. Just one repossession tonight. I thought that we would start things off simply, he said. She just nodded her head and looked down at the piece of paper. It had the picture what seemed like a young-looking guy with the words repossession stamped over it. It also had his home and work addresses as well as what organs needed to be repossessed. In this case it was his small and large intestines. So what exactly is the plan? Are we just going to stake out his house, or are we going to go looking for him? Shish. He was actually curious how exactly repo men found their targets. It's not like someone who missed a payment would just be walking around the city. That would just be stupid. We'll check out his house first. If he's not there, we'll check the route he takes to his place of work. If that doesn't work, we're just going to have to stake out his house, he said, still walking down the tunnel that apparently lead to the residential district. However, you'd be surprised at how often I find them just out on the street. What kind of idiot would just be walking out in the open when they knew that they had a repo man coming after them? She asked incredulously. I used to wonder the same thing, but it makes our jobs all the easier. Besides, it's not like we send them a notice or anything, he said, shrugging. Gee, his shoulders at how people could be so stupid. In any case, when we do find him, I want you to hang back and watch, at least until I have him down. Whatever. Less work for me then. She was actually a little miffed. She was perfectly able to handle some random villager, but if he wanted to do all the work, so be it. It had been a few hours now, and unfortunately they had not been able to find their target out on the streets. That led them to taking up a position on the building across the street from the man's apartment. How long exactly are we going to wait for him? It's already 3 in the morning. If he hasn't come home yet, he probably isn't going to, asked a frustrated Anko. All Naruto could do was shake his head. We've only been out here for 4 hours, there's still plenty of time for him to show up. Besides, the bars will be closing soon, chances are he knew that he had missed a payment and went off to get drunk. Anko just nodded her head. She properly would have done the same thing. Though in all honesty, even if there wasn't a repo man after her, she would still be out getting drunk anyways. Fine, whatever you say. Thankfully only a few minutes later their target stumbled down the street in the direction of the building they were watching. There he is. Now stay here until I have him on the ground. And with that he jumped down off the building and disappeared into the shadows. Anko was actually surprised at just how well he was able to conceal himself. Unable to spot him, she turned her focus onto the man they had been waiting for. He was rather ordinary looking, though obviously drunk out of his mind. It was then she noticed that somehow Naruto had gotten behind him and was slowly sneaking up behind him. It was when he was standing right behind him that she saw his hands reach out and grab him from behind and ram his head into the wall of the building adjacent to them. He then made a motion for her to come down and join him. Jumping down to the street below, it was only a matter of seconds until she was standing beside him. Giving her one last look, he then reached down and grabbed one of the blades he had stored in his boots and leaned down over the man. It was then that she noticed the man wasn't dead when he let out a low moan and opened his eyes. She was even more surprised when she noticed that Naruto paid the man's moans no mind and began cutting into his torso. That was when the screaming started and the man started to thrash around. However, it made no difference, and soon there was a large hole in the man's stomach area. A few minutes later he was done and had both large and small intestines in his bag. He got up and started to walk away. Anko, however, was still standing in the same spot, her mind running over what she had just seen. It wasn't that he had killed the man, she had done that before and it no longer bothered her. However, she had never stuck around and disemboweled them afterward. Not to mention she had always prided herself on making a clean kill. It was just professional courtesy. But he hadn't even made sure the man was unconscious before cutting into him. "Common kid, we don't have all night," he yelled at her from the end of the street. They were back in the tunnels on their way back to deliver the organs they had just repossessed. Anko was still lost in her thoughts about what she had just seen, and Naruto wasn't much of a conversationalist. It was only once they got back to the main room at REPO headquarters was the silence broken. "Hey Dick Les, who's that?" asked a black-haired man probably no older than 20. He was wearing a black trench coat with a white apron underneath that just happened to be covered in blood. He was sitting on one of the couches spread out in the lobby part of the room. All Naruto could do was sigh. "She's the new girl." He turned to her. "Anko, this charming fellow is Sai. He's the second most senior repo man and also in charge when I'm not around." "Sai, this is the new girl, so play nice." "When am I not nice, Dick Les?" he asked with that creepy fake smile on his face. He then turned to look at Anko and what passed for a contemplative look passed over his face. He then reached out to shake her hand. "Hello, my name's Sai. It's a pleasure to meet you, flat chest." His fake smile never left his face, even when Anko's fist connected with it and sent him flying across the room. "Don't mind him. He may be a complete sociopath, but he's still the only other repo man in Konoha that has any extensive ninja training. Now come on, the night's almost over and I want to get home as soon as possible." He then walked back to the storage room with Anko in tow. "You can just hang your stuff up in your locker, but once you start to kill your own targets, there's a our room back here that you can hose the blood off in." He then walked over to the back of the room and disappeared around the corner. This was her chance. After all, she had no idea just how long she would be able to last as a spy for the Hokage, and finding out just who the head repo man was high on her priority list. Also, she had to admit she was curious to see just what kind of person was able to do what she had just seen him do. So changing back into her street clothes, she snuck back to the shower room and found the last person she had ever thought she would see in REPO. Naruto Senju, head surgeon. Well, up until a few weeks ago anyway, at Konoha Hospital, greatest medical genius of his generation, maybe even surpassing his adopted mother, the legendary medic Tsunade, was a REPO man. It was almost too impossible to believe. Hell, she was sure that if someone had just come up and told her that, she would have laughed in their faces and walked away. She may have been too young to have known him in the academy, but had certainly seen him around town and at the hospital. Hell, he had even been her doctor when she had broken her arm during training a few years ago, and she could say, with confidence, that he in no way seemed like the kind of person that would be involved in REPO. But there he was standing, hosing the blood off of his suit. I know what you're thinking. How can someone like me do something like this? Right, he didn't even turn to face her. The truth is, I'm just as crazy as everyone else, probably more so. The key to this business is not to not lose your mind, but to lose on your own terms. I came to the conclusion that as Naruto, the doctor, the person, that I simply wasn't able to do what I had to do. So in a sense I decided to stop being Naruto when I was working, and now, in effect, I'm almost two people sharing the same body, almost being the key word there, but it works for me. Sai is a sociopath, so has no moral compass to tell him if what he's doing is right or wrong. All REPO men that last any significant amount of time have to be at least a little crazy. So now I ask you, after everything you've seen tonight, knowing exactly what it takes to make it here, do you still want to join? Because this is your last chance to just walk away. He still had his back to her as he finished, not even turning to face her once. Enko's mind was racing. Was this really a good idea? Did she really want to do this? The Hokage had given her an out when he had assigned this to her. Surely he would understand that she didn't think that she would be able to finish the mission. Besides, from just this one night she had learned more about REPO than any outsider would probably know. But then the image of all the people that had told her that she would never make T as a ninja called her names because she was related to a pair of missing nin, all the cold looks she had gotten, and her resolve strengthened. No, she would not back down. Now, not after coming so far. Consequences be damned. Fuck that. People already tell me I'm batshit crazy, so no worries there. Besides, I'm already here and I far too lazy to start looking for another job. Now, alright then. He then turned to face her. If you're sure, then meet me here at 7 on weekdays. We'll do training until 10 and then go out and do the same thing we just did. And remember to start reading those books. Remember, our job isn't to kill people, it's to get back Jinko's property intact. He then started to walk past her back out into the now empty lobby. Now we're done for the night. I would suggest you go home and get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long night. Well, there's chapter 2. What do ya think? Seriously, tell me what you think. Good, bad, whatever, I want to hear it. Anyways, like I said, there's a link to Anko's REPO suit on my profile as well as Naruto's. Also, I promise more blood in the next few chapters, lots more. Also, in case any of you are wondering if this is going to be a Naruto Anko pairing, well, yes and no, kind of, maybe, I think. Also, I hope you enjoyed my making Sai a REPO man. He's going to be my comic relief, so there'll be more of him in the future. Also, I'm still looking for a beta. Any volunteers would be greatly appreciated. A little shorter than I wanted, but still good, I think. Anyway, that's all for now. Keep your eyes open for the next chapter. It's going to be mostly training as well as some other stuff. Can't give too much away now, CAI. Anyways, I got sidetracked, so that's it for now, till next time. And as always, reviews are much appreciated. Happiness is not a warm scalpel. REPO. The ninja opera REPO girl. 3 months. She had been at it for 3 months now, and she was sure the only thing that was keeping her sane, well, as sane as she was before she had taken this mission anyway, was her precious dango. The only thing better would be large amounts of alcohol, but seeing as how she was now a civilian, and therefore under the current drinking age limit, that was no longer an option, so dango would just have to do for now. It was still early in the afternoon and she still had almost 4 hours to kill before she had to be at work. So obviously there was only one place to be. She had found this little gem almost 2 years ago and had instantly fallen in love. It may not have been much to look at, but they had the best dango in the village. Not to mention it was one of the few places she could eat at without everyone giving her dirty looks. Well, at least not about her past anyway. Some people still didn't appreciate her wardrobe, but that was their problem. So like almost every day she bought a plate of dango and retreated to a deserted booth to enjoy her meal and catch up on her reading. Before she had actually joined REPO, she would have never guessed at just how much you had to know about the human body. Hell, if she wanted to, she could probably become a medic nin after this, not that she had any plans to actually do that. She liked hurting people, not making them feel better. The thought of medic nin inadvertently brought up thought about the man she was currently training under. It had taken more than a few days to get over the fact that the man training her on how to remove someone's heart properly was also the same man who used to be the best surgeon in the entire village. It made some sense in a grotesque sort of way. After all, both jobs required skill with a knife and knowledge of the human body. Really, there was almost no difference between the two jobs other than REPO men don't replace the organs they remove. She was also a little shocked when she found out that the Hokage already knew about Naruto being in REPO, not to mention the fact that apparently he had actually been his genin sensei. Unfortunately, since then she had not come across much that was worth informing the Hokage about, just the names of the other REPO men. She was still in training, so didn't have access to anything too sensitive. But still, if everything went according to, she would soon start practicing on people. She was honest enough to admit that she was a little nervous about it, not the killing people part. She had no problem with that. But she still didn't know about the hanging around and pulling their guts out part. It was one thing to practice on someone who was already dead, but to just start cutting into someone while they were still alive was something else. However, she was soon brought out of her thoughts as a shadow fell across her. Looking up from her book, she was surprised to see one of her only friends in the village. She and Karana had both graduated from the academy together. Even thought they had ended up on different teams, they had still managed to keep in contact with one another. Unfortunately, since she had accepted the mission to infiltrate REPO, they had not had a chance to get together. "What's up, Karana-chan?" She just stood there with her ever-present scolding look. Anko really did lick her, but sometimes she thought that the other girl needed to lighten up or get laid or something. "Don't you, Karana-chan?" "Me. It's been almost 3 months since I've seen you last, and what's this? I hear about you being stripped of your ninja status," she said with her holier-than-thou tone while tapping her foot. All Anko could do was laugh weakly and rub the back of her head. "Heard about that, did ya?" All she got was a curt nod from the girl that was now sitting across from her. "Bah, nothing to worry about. Sooner or later they'll realize just how awesome a ninja I was and come begging me to come back. The way I see it, I'm just on an extended vacation." She wished that she could tell her friend the truth, but she knew better than anyone just how many recourses Jean Company had, and she really didn't want to try her luck any more than she already was. "Honestly, Anko, sometimes I wonder about you," said the other 15-year-old girl. "One would think that being discharged as a ninja would make you take life a bit more seriously. But here you are the same as always. Hey now, that's not true. As you can plainly see, it's well past noon and I'm not drunk. I would think that would make you happy. And besides, maybe it's not me not taking things too seriously, but you who need to loosen up. Think about it," she said in her best old wise man impression. "Damn it, Anko, I'm not the one who saint my job because I have an attitude problem," Karana all but hissed out. Now that was a low blow. "Now what the hell is that supposed to mean?" Anko responded in a hiss of her own. "It means that you got fired because you have the mental maturity of a 5-year-old. Not to mention your lack of any kind of a temper or professionalism, and don't even get me started on the fact that you're a borderline psychopath. Seriously, it's a wonder that you even made it to chunin," she finished in a huff. "I had hoped that maybe this would have been like a wake-up call or something, but I can see now that you're not going to change for anything. What the fuck? Where the hell did she get off telling her that she was a screw-up like that? And what the hell did her acting the way she did have anything to do with anything? It wasn't like she let it get in the way of completing a mission or anything. And she was most certainly not a psychopath. She spent enough time around them to know, a little sadist. I see, maybe, but she most certainly wasn't a psychopath, at least not yet anyways. Well, fuck you you uptight bitch. she all but yelled as she stood up from her seat and stormed out of the little dang stall. It was still a little early, but she would much rather hang out at the lobby at REPO HQ than hang out around here and have the chance of running into Kurana again. She was still fuming as S. He walked back into the main lobby lounge room after changing into her REPO uniform. Unfortunately, though for who exactly is debatable, she wasn't the only one there. Hey flat chest, you're here early. Over the months she had gotten used to Sai's odd behavior, but she was in no mood for him today. So before he could get off any more insults, she let loose her strongest punch and sent him flying into one of the walls. Not that we don't appreciate you shutting him up for a few minutes, but you mind me asking what's got you in such a foul mood today? Came the voice of the only other REPO man that was in the room. His name was Kakashi. He was an orphan who failed to graduate his last year of the Shinobi Academy when he was younger. Unfortunately, that was about all she knew about him other than the fact that he was probably the sanest person here, though he was rather new, having only been doing this for a little over a year now, but even still he was easily the most normal person in REPO. It's not important. She waved him off. As normal as he was, this was still REPO, and getting all emotional over a stupid fight was not something she really wanted to do. By the way, where's the captain? I know I'm a little early, but I saw his stuff in the locker room. He seemed to think on it for a minute before the answer came to him. Yeah, he came in early today. Probable a big job down in one of the operating rooms. Didn't seem particularly pleased to be called in early either. Thanks Kashi-kun. And with a wave she walked over to the door that would lead down to the operating rooms. Weaver, just as she was about to walk in, she stopped. For some odd reason there seemed to be music lying in the background. As quietly as she could, she opened the door. However, what she saw, or importantly heard, left her flat-footed. There was Naruto, who was apparently just about to start operating on the squirming man until the now vertical table. But instead of his usual silence, he was actually singing. Deciding that this was most definitely not something to miss, she stayed where she was and started to listen as hard as she could. It's a thankless job, but somebody's got to do it. Here he made his first incision, completely oblivious to the man's screaming. Peelin' off the tissue inch by inch. Skinnin' off the muscles, too. There was now a large hole in the man's chest. His large and small intestines spilling out over the edges. Harvesting the kidneys for the fall. Savin' up the livers in the fridge. The man was now almost dead from blood loss, his earlier screams now nothing more than labored breathing. No one ever thanks me when I'm done. How self-absorbed people can be. He then grabbed one of the large plastic tubs sitting on one of the table's surrounding the operating table, then reached into the new hole that he had just made and began to pull out the man's large and small intestines. It was then that the last spark of life in the other Mon's went out and he was well and truly dead. With a slice, or a snip, eeny meeny miny moo, finished with the man's GI tract, he then reached up into the man's chest so that his arm had almost disappeared into the man's torso. Quickly he pulled it out, now holding his heart. With a cut and a stitch, returning organs good as new. He then placed all the organs he had repossessed into individual bags and stored them in a freezer off to one side of the room, all the time humming to himself. It's a thankless job, but somebody's got to do it. He then almost danced over to the now cooling core of the man he had just killed and rammed his arm back up onto him so that it had almost disappeared. Like a mop, he sung in a different voice while making the man's mouth move. And a broom, he pulled his arm out of the man's chest. No one wants a thankless job. He finished with an overeducated bow. She was speechless for a moment, her brain taking the time to double-check that what she just saw was real or not. Having come to the conclusion that what she had just seen really had happened, she could only think of one response. Naruto spun around and caught off guard from the Sudan noise. It didn't take him long to figure out just what had happened. There, standing in the doorway, was the newest addition to the REPO, almost dabbled over in laughter. Embarrassed at being caught in a slightly embarrassing position, all he was able to do was rub the back of his neck in embarrassment. How long have you been standing there? This was just too funny. To think that she had caught one of the most feared men in the village using the core of his most recent repossessions to practice his ventriloquism. Oh, oh, this is just too good, wait until I tell the rest of the guys. She said, wiping a fake tear from her eye. The thought had crossed her mind that a normal person would probably have found the entire thing horrifying. That made her think of her earlier argument with Karana. Well, fuck her, I like who I am and I think this is funny. Unfortunately, that entire train of thought completely ruined her good mood. YHA, laugh it up while you can. But after 3 days of no sleep I need something to keep myself occupied with. He said in annoyance. Now come on, I have something for you. And without another word he walked by her, motioning for her to follow. Following him down the hallway, she could help but notice that instead of going back up the stairs to the common room, they were instead heading to one of the other operating rooms. I have to admit that you're progressing much faster than I thought you would originally, so I decided to speed up your training. And with that he pushed open the doors. Before the door was even opened, Anko knew what was waiting for her behind it. She had already started on human corpses, so that only left one option as to what could be waiting for her. And sure enough, she was right. Their street, wrapped to the table, was a man she had never seen before in her life. Not that that wasn't uncommon, it was a rather large village after all. Seeing as how this is your first repossession, I decided to keep it simple. All you have to do is remove the man's heart. And with that he took her hand and placed his signature double-bladed scalpel in her hand. She just looked down at the sharp surgical knife in her hand, then back up to the man standing beside her. All he did was give her a reassuring nod before gesturing for her to get started. She gulped in nervousness. This was going to be her first real repossession. She had practiced before on cadavers, but it just wasn't the same thing. Taking a deep breath, she slowly walked up to the operating table to get a good look at the man she was about to kill. He was probably only in his mid-20s with long scraggly brown hair. He wasn't wearing a shirt, leaving his chest bare. It was when she was about to make her first incision that his eyes snapped open in fear and looked wildly around the room. It was when he saw the knife in her hand that he started yelling. Well, trying to yell, he was thankfully gagged. She was a little startled and looked back at the man standing by behind her. She may never have said it out loud, but over the months she had become to idolize her sensei. He had taught her more than her genin sensei had ever, not to mention he, as well as the rest of the people in REPO, had treated her better than almost all of the other people in the village, and the thought of disappointing him left a bitter taste in her mouth. So, she gathered her convictions, remembered what she had been taught, and began to cut away the skin and muscles around the man's rib cage. All the while his screams had become more and more wild. She cracked open the man's ribs with some difficulty before cutting the still beating organ out and placing it in a plastic bag that Naruto had handed her. Overall it had taken her 5 minutes, a little slow. She knew that the blonde standing behind her usually could have done it in less than 3, but for her first time she was rather proud of herself. All doubts about herself that her argument with Karana forgotten in the face of this accomplishment. That was rather impressive for your first time, a little slow, but that will come with practice. Came a calm voice from the man standing behind her. Damn straight it was impressive. But seriously, what were you expecting? I mean, this is me we're talking about. Any squeamishness she thought she might have felt at cutting open a man was quickly shed at the prize she got from what was quickly becoming the most important person in her life. Not that the list was all that long to begin with, mind you. Of course. What was I thinking, doubting what was it again? Oh yes. Your kick-ass awesomeness. He chuckled at the pudding face she gave him. Hey now, you know that I'm the only one around here that's allowed to tease people. If you aren't doing then, so will everyone else. Then I'll have to find a new thing to call my own, and I'm far too lazy to do that. She joked. Whatever you say, Repo girl. I'm just glad you're in a better mood. Now come on. The night's still young and I still have work of my own to do. And with a simple wave of his hand they were both off. Anko was currently lying on her bed in her small apartment. She had just come back from a meeting with the Hokage and was really in no mood to be out amongst the general public. It had started off like always. He asked her if she had seen or heard anything suspicious. She told him the same thing she always told him. That she was still a trainee and they sure as hell weren't about to tell her about their plans for world domination yet. Normally that was it, but today had been different. Instead of just accepting that she really didn't know anything, he had started to ask her about how her personal life had been going. Well, she certainly didn't appreciate the Ma-en sticking his nose in where it wasn't wanted but couldn't really just tell him to fuck off. He was the Hokage after all. That had gone on for an uncomfortable 20 minutes, accumulating in her realizing that her personal life sucked. After her argument with Kurana, she had distanced herself from the other girl, not that that was her fault, mind you. The entire meeting had ended with the Hokage warning her about becoming too attached to the people she was supposed to be spying on. She had simply scoffed at the man's warning and walked out of the building. However, now that she had had some time to think about what he had said, she found that he might have been right. She was honest enough to admit that the only reason she had found she had no problem playing spy was because there simply wasn't anything to spy on at the moment. However, the thought that sooner or later she was going to be in a position where she was going to have to make a choice that could very well get not only Orochimaru in trouble but maybe all the other repo men as well, and that was a though that she found left her feeling very guilty. She would admit that over the months she come to see the repo men in a different light. Well, they may not have been the sanest of people she had ever met, they had almost become a kind of family, a feeling she was rather sure was not unique to her. Sai may have been annoying, but he as almost like that crazy uncle every family has. And Kakashi played the role of big brother, even though he was hardly the oldest or most senior repo man. It really wasn't that surprising to her. Most other repo men had almost no life outside of the job, so all they had was each other. Then there was Naruto. She wasn't entirely sure what role he fit into. He seemed to take it upon himself to play several. One moment he's acting the father, trying to keep the rest of the repo men in line, then he switches over to being everybody's little brother trying to make people laugh, and then he switches to playing the overbearing mother. Which for the record is a rather disturbing thought, making sure everyone had their paperwork finished and that they kept their equipment in clean and put away in their lockers. She had actually laughed the first time she saw him chew out Sai for leaving a bloody knife on a stack of magazines in the common room. However, it was the thought of getting the blonde in trouble that bothered her the most. He had taken her under his wing and had in his own silent way shown her more kindness than anyone else had in her life. She wasn't entirely sure what she felt for him: admiration, respect, maybe love. She really couldn't give the feeling a word, and if it came down to choosing either her mission or him, she really didn't know which she would choose. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. She just nodded her head in the affirmative. "All right then." He grabbed one of the folders on his desk and handed it to her. "You understand that I'm only going to observe, this is all you." Again she just nodded her head. "Okay, let's head out, it's going to be a long night." This was it, the final part of her training. All she had to do now was show that she knew how to do the job and she would become a full member of Repo. Well, that was still a week or two away, but that really wasn't that important right now. However, before she got the chance to show her stuff, she still needed to find her target, and that was proving somewhat difficult. She was neither at her apartment nor at her place of work nor anywhere in between. It was really starting to get frustrating. "Just calm down and remember everything I taught you. It's almost 3, the bars and nightclubs will be closing soon. Just as patient," came the calm voice of her sensei. Right, all I need to do is take a few deep breaths and calm down. The night's still young and she has to come home at some point," she thought to herself, trying to calm her frazzled nerves. Unfortunately, no matter what she did, she just could not seem to calm herself down. This may have only been her first time out tracking her own targets, and she knew that she would have all week to prove herself, but she still wanted to impress her sensei by getting it right on the first try. Unfortunately, the gods were apparently against her on this night, as just then the heavens opened up and it started to rain. "Perfect, just perfect," she mumbled to herself. This was just what she needed. So now, on top of being nervous, she was soaking wet. Could the night get any worse? She had been sitting out in the rain for almost an hour now and was in less than happy. She almost felt sorry for the person she had been waiting for, because she knew that she was probably going to be less than gentle with them when they finally decided to come home. As if on cue, she noticed a person walking along the road in the direction of the apartment she had been staking out now for well over 2 hours. Unfortunately, it was too dark to identify them from her current hiding place. But it was almost 4 in the morning and the chances it was not the person she had been looking for were slim. Looking back at the man that had been teaching her for almost half a year. Now she nodded her head in the direction of the person down on the street. All the response she got was him giving her a nod of his head as if to say that this was her repose. And he wasn't going to do any of the work for her. Shaking her head she jumped down of the building and tried to hide herself in the shadow like she had seen Naruto do on many occasions. Now he was no slouch when it came to stealth and all that, but for the life of her she just couldn't understand how he had become so good at it. It was like he almost melted into the shadow themselves. How? Ever despite the fact that she was sure she would never be as good at hiding as her sensei, she was still competent, and in no time at all she had been able to get a good look at the woman that was now approaching the apartment building she had been watching, and sure enough it was the same woman she had been waiting for. Deciding that it would be best to get her before she entered the building, Anko put on a burst of speed, and in less than a second she was standing behind the girl that could be no older than 25. It was now that her training kicked in, not quite as confident in her skills as the man who was no doubt watching the entire thing from back up on the roof. She decided to just slit the girl's throat so she wouldn't have to deal with her kicking and screaming. Tightening her grip on the knife in her hand, she slowly reached out and in one quick movement she grabbed the girl's head in her free hand, pulling it back to expose her slender neck, and in a flash of dragged the knife across, resulting in a large spray of blood and the girl suddenly going limp in her arms. Letting her fall to the ground, she kneeled over her, quickly cutting through her cloths, revealing the skin underneath. Deciding that this was no time to be taking chances, she slowly and methodically cut away the skin and muscle around her stomach area and pushing both large and small intestines out of the way so she had a clean shot at the woman's liver. After that it was almost too easy to remove the large triangular organ and place it in a plastic bag. That dawn she stood up and started to walk back to where he had thought that Naruto had been waiting for her. However, as he had done on many occasions to her, instead of simple jumping down of the building, he walked out of the shadows to the side and gave her a start. No matter how much time she spent with him, she still had been able to track the man. Once he had gone all stealthy on her. "Damn it, how many times do I have to tell you to wear a bell or something?" she called out cheerfully, her spirits still high from her first successful repossession in the field. Well, that would kind of defeat the purpose of hiding now, wouldn't it? Besides, I'd out that even if I was wearing 100 bells you'd be able to find me, he said mockingly. All she was able to do was shake her head at him. He may have been crazier than her, but he was still fun to hang out with, well, most of the time. He had an unfortunate habit of getting all dark and broody every now and again, but for the most part she was glad she had had the chance to learn under him. Well, as soon as you find a suit with 100 bells on, we'll test that theory, but until then, she held up the bag with the liver in it. Why don't you throw me the storage bag so I can put the sucker on ice and we can get out of here? It's almost 5 and unlike some people I could mention, I do need my beauty sleep. Naruto just laughed at his student antics as he threw her the large leather bag they used to transport organs. All right, we're done for the night. All we have to do is drop this back at Gene Company and you can go get some shut-eye. She made what sounded like a happy chirping sound at the thought of a warm bead as she followed the blonde man back down the streets in the direction of the Gene Company complex. So how'd I do? Come on, tell me, was I as awesome as or what? She asked, still on a high from her first repo. Well, you were a little on the slow side and some of these cuts seemed kind of sloppy from where I was watching, he said, not even needing turn his head to see the disappointed put on her face. But overall I have to say that I'm rather proud of you, kid. I've seen gown men do much worse on their first time, not that I'm all that surprised. Rom, the first time I saw you hold a knife I knew you were going to be one of the best, and you just proved me right back there. Her face lit up with excitement. He was proud of her. No one had ever been proud of her, and she meant no one. Not only was he proud, but he had said she was one of the best, not that there had been any doubt in her mind about her own greatness, but for someone else to see it as well was almost more than she could take. Letting out an almost ear-splitting squeal, she flung herself at her sensei's back, warping her arms around his neck. Get off. If I knew why you were going to throw yourself at me at every little compliment, I never would have said anything. said the blonde in between choked breaths. Realizing that she had made a fool of herself, she quickly drew MPEDO and rubbed the back of her neck sheepishly, something that Naruto did and apparently had rubbed off on her. Hehe, sorry about that, just don't get that many compliments coming my way, you know. It's fine, really, just remember next time to keep your feet firmly planted on the ground and for the love of God never squeal like that again, he said, having a bit of difficulty keeping the mirth out of his voice so as to sound at least a little bit annoyed. Whatever you say, boss man, she said with a mock salute. But seriously, was I fucking awesome or what? Well, there you go, a bit fillerish, as fillerish a word. But I liked it, a bit more about how Anko feels about Naruto, as well as lots more blood and even a song. What more do you people want? Seriously, what do you want? Oh, ND, just in case you couldn't tell, bolded words are song. Also, this arc will be ending either next chapter or the one after that, and I want to know who you want to read about next. Your options are Grav, Robber. I have an idea as to which Naruto character I want to use, but nothing's definite yet, so any ideas would be appreciated. I also want to devote at least a few chapters to Orochimaru and his fucked up family before the end. Also had an idea of doing 1 or 2 chapters about Kakashi, but there would be considerably less blood in those as it would mostly be political maneuvering and the like. Also, if there's anyone in particular that you want to see, let me know and I'll see what I can do. Anyways, that's it for now, and as always, reviews are much appreciated. Tonight we are Betrayed, REPO, the ninja opera REPO girl. She was finally in. After only a week of observation, Naruto had said she was ready to start working on her own as a full-fledged REPO man. It may have taken her more than half a year, but she had done it. Unfortunately, this brought up some serious moral questions on her part. Namely, the fact that she was now in a position where it was rather likely she would come across information that could potentially get Gene Company as well as the other REPO men in a lot of hot water. And although she, as well as most of the other REPO men, was never very fond of Orochimaru, she really didn't want to get Naruto and the others in trouble. They had almost become the family she never had, and the thought of them going to jail or worse left a very bad taste in her mouth. However, that was not the issue right now, and the only solution she had come up with so far was to simply focus on her work and hope she never came across any information that would put her in a place where she had to choose between them and the village. So with her rather flimsy plan in mind, she shoved all thought of the future aside and instead focused on the job at hand. This was her first time working solo, and she was determined that nothing was going to go wrong so long as she had any say in it. Not that she thought that this was going to be anything other than a standard REPO, but she'd be damned if she let Naruto-sensei down now after he had put his confidence in her. So remembering all the thing he had taught her, she was now staked out on the building opposite from the apartment complex her target was supposed to be living. And sure enough, after only an hour of waiting, there she was. A rather unassuming girlie, probably no older than herself if that, with long brown hair and a liver that was now 90 days past due. Shaking her head to clear it of all thoughts about her double life, she jumped down of the building and rushed at her target, deciding that as sneaky as she was, it was just faster to rush them and be done with it. Circulating chakra through her legs, she was able to close the distance before the girlie even had time to react to her. Taking a note out of her sensei's notebook, she set her momentum and slammed the girl's head into the wall of her apartment building with a sickening crack. Oh well, I wasn't really in the mood to listen to her screaming anyway, she thought as stared down at the now lifeless corpse at her feet. After that, it was all too easy to cut open the girl and remove her still warm liver. A little anticlimactic for my first time solo, but no complaints from me, she thought as she packed the organ for transport. Stepping back and wiping some of the excess blood of her gloves, she turned around and started to walk off. A week, she had been a full-fledged REPO man for a week now, and still the thought of spying on her colleges left a bitter taste in her mouth. She knew that she could no longer put it off like in the past. The Hokage would undoubtedly be on her back demanding results. Hell, she had a meeting scheduled for the next day and she already knew what he was going to say. The only problem was that she had nothing to report, despite what he obviously thought REPO men really weren't told anything all that secret, except for Naruto. She supposed he was the head REPO man for not only the village but all their other operations around the world. And the thought of breaking into his office was something she really didn't think she could do. She owed him too much to do something like that to him, but she could already hear the Hokage's voice in her head telling her that her loyalty to the village superseded all others and that no matter her personal feelings she had a job to do, and if she wasn't able to then he might as well pull her from the mission. And that was something she really didn't want to happen. Arg, why does life have to be so complicated? She said, slamming her head down on her kitchen table in frustration. Sitting in her apartment lamenting her life was doing no one any good, she decided to do the only sensible thing any sane person would do in her position. She decided to go out and get drunk. Most places wouldn't serve an underage civilian girl, but thankfully she had found a particularly seedy bar that had no such moral qualms. Anko wasn't entirely sure just how long she had been sitting there. Thought the large stack of sake bottles beside her seemed to indicate it had been at least a few hours. Though in her inebriated state time seemed to lose all its importance, and besides he was quite happy just where she was. Thank you very much. God damn it, Anko, what the hell do you think you're doing? Came an oddly familiar voice from behind her. It's been almost 7 months and still since you got suspended and you haven't even tried to change. What the hell is wrong with you? Ah, now she remembered. Hi, it's Karana-chan, long time no see. She slurred. And I'll tell ya what's wrong. She picked up a sake bottle. I'm out of sake. She laughed. All Karana could do was stand there looking like a fish out of water. Well, don't just stand there, grab a set and let's get drunk. Come on, it'll be fun. That's it, Anko. I'm done, no more. I've tried to patient with you but I can see it's no use. No matter how much I scold you I can see now it's pointless. You're a lost cause, Anko, and I'm washing my hands of you right now. Ah, don't be like that, Karana-chan. I'm just having a bit of fun. Besides, I keep trying to tell ya I don't need to change. Lots of people like me just the way I am. Now sit down and have a drink with your old friend Anko. No, Anko, I meant what I said. I just can't do this anymore. I hope that you pull your life together eventually, but it's going to have to be without me there. Goodbye, Anko. And with that she turned around and started to walk away. Well, fine. I don't need ya anyway. I got lots other friends that like me for being me anyway. You uptight bitch, I'm better off without ya anyway. She yelled at the retreating back of her former best friend, turning back to her ever-growing pile of sake bottles even more depressed than when she had come in. She hated the sun, hated it with a passion. It may have been that she had gotten used to working at night, though it was more likely because the large shiny ball of light had the nerve to shine through her window and wake her up after an all-night binder. That was probably it. Unfortunately, she wasn't simply able to ignore it today. She had a meeting with the Hokage in half an hour, and even she wouldn't keep the man waiting if she could help it. So growing, she quickly threw off her covers, dashed through her morning rituals, and was out the door, a stick of dango hanging half-eaten out of her mouth as she struggled to get her arm into one of the sleeves of her trench coat. Already she knew that the one-eyed bastard was probably going to chew her out for not producing anything valuable. Not that it was her fault, really. I mean really, I'm just a low-level repo man. I probably had higher clearance when I was still a ninja. However, before she had a chance to continue to think of reasons she hadn't produced any useful intelligence, she arrived at the small tea house that they had been using for their clandestine meetings. Not even giving the old man at the front desk a look, she walked to the back of the store, and there he was, the single most powerful man in the village, sitting on a creative tea, giving her a very stern look. However, tea soon morphed into a more natural one and eventually into his patented eye smile. Ah, hello Anko-chan, so nice of you to drop by. It's been so long since I've heard from you. I was beginning to worry something had happened, he said, all the while keeping his voice light and airy. Anko, however, knew better than to take the man at his word. She knew that he was more than a little displeased at the lack of information she had been able to feed him, and more than likely a little suspicious considering she hadn't set up a meeting with him in months. Well, what can I say? I haven't had much to report. I mean, I only got promoted to full repo man status recently, and really repo men don't really see anything all that interesting, so there wasn't any reason to risk contacting you. She hoped her reasoning would satisfy him. Be that as it may, I would still have appreciated a note every now and then, if for no other reason than to let me know that you were still alive. However, that's not why I called you here. One of my sources in the council gave me some rather disturbing news recently. It seems that our good friend Orochimaru has been donating rather large amounts of money to a number of charities that just happen to be controlled by a number of council members. He's up to something, and if the amount of gold he's giving out is any indication, it's something big. You're my only source. Hell, the only source in all of Orochimaru's organization, and I need to know what he's planning. I don't care what you have to do to get me this information. You have my full authorization to do what needs to be done. Even if you have to compromise your identity, though I would much prefer you don't unless it's absolutely necessary. Anko was shocked. This was big. If he was willing to compromise the only source, albeit not a very productive one, in all of Gene Company, then this had to have been bloody important. Are you sure? I mean, as far as I know, I'm the only person to have success FU. LLY infiltrated Orochimaru's organization. I mean, I'll try my best not to get caught and all, but I know I'm going to have to break into at least one office, probably more than that, and the odds aren't exactly in my favor. Here, I know this isn't going to be easy and it'll take a miracle to pull this off and still maintain your identity as a repo man, but there's no point in having someone in your position and to not use them. But like I said, completing this mission takes precedence over keeping you cover. Alright, I'll do it, but I can't make any promises. Her mind was flashing through all her memories she had in that please, and sadly she found that they were some of the happiest she had. They had accepted her and taken her in and treated her like the family she had always hoped for. And here she was sneaking behind their back, and it made her feel physically ill. Kakashi was no fool. He had taken part in more than one infiltration mission in his life and knew exactly what the girl in front of him was thinking. It really was an inevitability in these types of missions. You had to get close to your targets if you wanted to get any information. The key was not to get too close, something he feared Anko had done. Not that he could blame her. She had been alone most of her life. It wasn't unreasonable to assume that she would cling on to the first person who showed even a small amount interest in her life. Add to that person had been his former student who, even if it was subconsciously, was easily one of the most caring, albeit less than stable, person he knew. And it all added up to a very real chance that he could lose his source to the enemy permanently. If he was honest with himself, he would only give her a 50-50 chance of completing the mission and returning the information to him. And this was one of the main reasons he had given it to her. She would either deliver the goods and prove that she was loyal to the village, or she wouldn't, and he would have lost one of the more promising ninja of the latest generation. Either way, this was probably going to be her last act as his spy. That's all I ask. Just remember, I need this information ASAP. Yes, sir. And with that she turned around and walked back out the front of the shop and back to her apartment. Fuck, what the hell am I supposed to do? She screamed in her mind as she slammed her head down on her kitchen table. What the hell was she going to do? On one hand she had her loyalty to the village, not to mention that Kakashi had placed his trust in her to carry out this mission. And on the other she had Naruto and the rest of the repo men. Over the months she had come to see them as the family she had always wanted. They had accepted her as she was, something the people she had previously thought of as friends seemingly weren't able to do. And just the thought of betraying them almost made her want to throw up, not to mention what they would think of her when EY found out she had been spying on them the whole time. I just need to calm down and think this through. Now I'm pretty sure I can get the information without getting caught. It'll be the investigation afterward that will probably get me caught. So I'll just find what the Hokage's looking for and then decide if it's worth compromising myself for. YHA, that'll work. Besides, it's probably nothing anyways. All right, now I just have to figure out just how the hell I'm supposed find anything on just what the hell Orochimaru is planning. Unfortunately, the only high security area she had clearance to be in was Repo HQ, and of that the only place that might sensitive documents was her sensei's office. Actually, now that she thought about it, there was a good chance that whatever she was looking for would probably be in there. He was in charge of all the repo men around the world and as such spent a good amount of his time with Orochimaru. There was a good chance that whatever had the Age's underwear in a bunch could be found in there, or at least some idea of what it was. The only problem was actually breaking in. Thankfully she knew that Naruto only spent as much time there as was absolutely necessary. Come to think of it, she had never seen him spend any more time than was needed at HQ. Hell, even she had just hung around every now and again if for no other reason than to chat with some of the other repo men. Oh well, just made her job all the easier. No, the real problem was that the door to his office was just off the lounge and anyone walking through would probably sound alarm and then she really would be screwed. Oh well, all she could do about that was throw up a genjutsu and hope it held up to any scrutiny. Plan firmly in mind, she timed her arrival almost an hour early so she could get her target and get back before anyone else and put her plan into action. Thankfully it was a simple kidney job, and the fact that target had almost literally run into her in one of the back streets made for one of the quickest repos on record. Having dropped of the organs in the freezer, she walked over the locker room and noticed that all the other repo men had apparently already suited up and left. Knowing that she had at least a good half hour before anyone would be coming back, she quickly stalked over to the door that led to Naruto's office. Quickly picking the lock, she cast a quick genjutsu over the door to make it seem to be closed. It wouldn't hold up to heavy scrutiny, but genjutsu had never really been her forte. Quickly looking around the rather Spartan room, she noticed all there was: a desk, chair and a number of filing cabinets. Not entirely sure what she was looking for, she decided to search the desk drawers first before moving on to the filing cabinets. She picked the locks on the drawers and shuffled through the papers within. Quickly scanning the papers, she noted that none of them were very interesting, mostly things like the number of organs repos a week in each village and things like that. Interesting, but probably not what she was looking for. The other drawers were the same. Unfortunately, just as she was about to move on to the filing cabinets, the light to the office flickered on. On instinct she whirled around and reached for one of the blades she had hidden in her repo suit. Unfortunately, as she saw who was leaning up against the door frame, the reality of her situation caught up to her and she realized she was well and truly screwed. She may have been able to fight some of the other repo men if she had been forced to, but she knew that there was no way she would be able to fight, let alone beat the man in the door. "Hello, Anko-chan," he greeted her without a hint of hostility in his voice. "You know, if you're looking for the more sensitive stuff, there's a safe the wall over there," he said, pointing his finger at the far right wall. Anko was speechless. She had been caught red-handed and he was still treating her like he always had. It didn't make any sense. He should at least be angry or something. But then again, if you're here for what I think you are, then I'll save you some time. He paused as he reached into an inside pocket of his lab coat that he wore when not wearing his repo suit, and pulled out a file folder. "I think this is what Kakashi-sensei is looking for." He put the file down on the desk. Now she was just plain confused. Why the hell was he giving her the information she was looking for? The only explanation she could think of was that it was fake or something, but after spending so much time with him she doubted it. He may be a little unbalanced, but he wasn't a liar. "Why are you giving me this? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know I'm a spy." "Of course I did. Honestly, Anko-chan, do you really think so little of me? I may not have specialized in counterintelligence, but I'm not blind either. It was rather obvious why you wanted to join Repo." Now Anko was really shocked. He had known, seemingly from the beginning, that she had been a spy, and he still let her in. It didn't make any sense. "If you knew I was a spy, then why did you let me join?" Oh, that. Like I told you when we first met, I saw something in you. Potential maybe, or it could have just been that I saw that you were one of the few people that could do this job and not break after a few years, who knows. The point is, I saw something in you that told me you would make a good repo man, and I was right. The fact that you were a spy was beside the point. He finished matter-of-factly. As for why I'm giving you this file, well, think of it like a test, because that really is what it is. And don't give me that look, it's not just my test, it's Kakashi-sensei's too. You have two options and only two. You can either take the file and walk out of here and give it to the Hokage, and in doing so more than likely have a number of people in the company and council arrested, or you can leave the file on my desk in which case the council will give Orochimaru the power create a police force to enforce the law in the village, taking away the power of the Hokage to use his Anbu for the same purpose. The choice is yours to make, and if you make the first one I promise not to stop you. This was not how this was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be simple. She would break in, find the information and find that the Hokage had gotten all worked up over nothing. Then she could continue to go on like she had been all this time and no one would be any the wiser. But now here she was standing in this office being forced to choose between two worlds. She knew that after this she was either going to be a shinobi or a repo man. There was no in between anymore. Looking down at the file on the desk in front of her, she could already feel her resolve cracking, and in that instant, knew what her answer was going to be. XXXXXXAN. If I was a bastard I would have stopped there. You're lucky I'm not. The clouds rolled gently across the night sky, casting long shadows over the world around her. Slowly breathing in the cool night air, she looked down upon the blooded corpse of her latest target. Almost 3 months passed since that fateful night she had chosen to remain a repo man. Not long after Orochimaru had gotten his bill passed and all police and internal security matters were handed over to him. Origin. Ally. The repo men had had to cover this new duty until a sufficient force of men could be trained to take over for them. That had been a particularly long month, and she had been more than happy when he first of the recruits had taken over for them. Other than that, it had thankfully been uneventful. In any case, she was happy with the choice she had made and would happily make the same again if given to chance. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.